All right, we got 11:45. Let's get this thing a-rolling. We got a council workshop we need to start up here. Let's start with roll call. Indra?
Here.
Seth?
Here.
Joel?
Here.
Rob?
Here.
Kathleen? Rick?
Here.
Eric?
Here.
Victoria?
Here.
And I am here as well. All right, looks like we're all here, so we can get going. First thing on the agenda is water treatment plant financing update. And
Yes, about financing stuff again. Thank you. So I do have a reasonably brief but in-depth presentation for you today. And this is to provide you for an update on the replacement water treatment plant financing update. And this is particularly following the cancellation of the FEMA BRIC program. And this supports your goal of infrastructure, complete the construction and commissioning of the replacement water treatment plant. So a little bit of background. On January 15th of 2025, the City Council did review the guaranteed maximum price for the replacement water treatment plant and a tentative financing plan at that time. Council evaluated several options, including adoption of the GMP and adoption of multiple small contracts while we finalized all of the BRIC financing. Council elected at that time to approve the GMP and several smaller agreements to keep the project moving forward at a pretty good pace, which was great, and we have. So adoption of the GMP provided the council with cost certainty. We knew what the price was, and we were locking that price in on over 90% of the project. Only the intake structure modifications were in question. And that was largely due to the BRIC grant because we didn't know what they were going to require us to build or how they were going to require us to flood protect that structure. However, at that time, the BRIC funding was not completely secured, and we did talk about that, and we could have been entering into an agreement that would have been difficult to fully fund without external resources. So you remember looking at this slide behind me. This is the pricing at the time. We approved the GMP of $98,817,574, which brought the total cost of the project at that time to $113,124,000, with only the intake structure work outstanding at that time. So we continued to work with our financing partners at Business Oregon, Oregon Emergency Management, in order to finalize the complex and diverse funding strategy. The current strategy is comprised of multiple loans, grants, rate revenues, system development charges, and congressionally directed spending. Staff are still actively working to find below market interest financing to help ensure that the current rate structure covers the costs of the project. And at the meeting on the 15th, BRIC Phase 1 had been confirmed as approved by Oregon Emergency Management and was in the process of being submitted from FEMA Region 10 to FEMA National for final approval. And it should have been awarded on January 20th of 2025. And as we all know now, that did not occur. On April 4th of 2025, Department of Homeland Security and FEMA announced the cancellation of the BRIC program, eliminating $50 million from our financing plan. Since April 4th, we have been very busy. JC, myself, the design build team, we have been here and there and everywhere, if we were to quote Dr. Seuss, but we have been finalizing the scope and budget on the intake structure and any work that needed to be done to the existing plant. We have been working with our federal and state elected officials to either restore funding or to really ascertain the status of that funding. We have been working with our Business Oregon partners to find additional low-cost financing to try and fill the gap. And then we've been trying to identify the lowest cost, most affordable financing options to backfill those BRIC resources that have been lost. So the intake structure was one of the first boxes we had to tick off because that had been in holding, entirely waiting on the BRIC grant. Now that we did not have any of the BRIC requirements, we could just move that design and costing forward, and we have done that. And we are now well underway. We do have a price, an estimated, this is a 30% estimate, which we think is still pretty high, of $9.24 million. Not being awarded the BRIC grant has significantly reduced the project costs for this part of the project. The BRIC requirements were going to be tough to comply with. Everything we installed at the existing plant site, all of the pumps, the motors, the electrical gear, were going to have to be elevated approximately 6 feet. And elevating all of that equipment 6 feet was going to be very expensive. So we have saved a little bit of money there. Not that we wouldn't have preferred to have the $50 million, but the good side, the flip side of that is we have saved a little bit. So I'm gonna go down this list because this is really the important thing. This is where we are today with financing. We have an additional $3.5 million that you have approved for owner's rep. That's for construction management charges. The GMP of the $99,446,000. Engineering and design costs, which have already been approved and largely paid, of $7.14 million. The membrane system purchase at $7.17 million. Intake engineering, this was the preliminary work, at $411,000. And lastly, the estimated intake GMP of $9.24 million, for a total project cost left to build of $1.27 million. I'm sorry, 127. That decimal place was way off. $127 million. Total paid to date is $9,048,000, which leaves a balance to pay of $117. As we start working down all of our funding, we have currently right at $24 million of cash on hand in the bank. We have confirmed loans from Business Oregon of $4 million, $1.5 million, congressionally directed spending of $2 million, confirmed but not contracted loans from Business Oregon of $6 million, $970,000 in drinking water revolving loan fund base, and an additional $1.5 million in water and wastewater funding, and cash deposits, future cash deposits as the project is moving along, of an additional $12 million, leaving us needing to borrow $66 million to complete the project. That's the important number. So Business Oregon had identified, and it does show up on that previous one, an additional $1.5 million in water and wastewater funding. This was to replace $1.5 million in Special Public Works Fund money that was specific to us receiving the BRIC grant. We have engaged our rate consultant, FCS, to evaluate the additional debt and the potential rate impacts. And we've also been working almost weekly with our bond counsel to really determine the best and most effective methods of issuing bonds for the remainder of the project. So starting on the bond side, we will need to issue bonds to acquire the remaining funding for the project. The bonds can be issued as general obligation bonds, full faith and credit, or revenue backed. And I don't talk about general obligation bonds for the remainder of the project or this presentation because we've ruled that out as an option. It just really isn't the right method to fund this, as they are property taxes paid back by property taxes. Full faith and credit would use the property tax valuation to back the bonds, but they would still be paid back with water revenue. What we might be able to get out of this is a little bit lower rate and potentially, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, a lower rate increase in the future if we use full faith and credit. And then revenue bonds is the other method, which is fully backed by the water utility and fully paid back by the water utility. Both of these methods do have pros and cons. Revenue bonds without the full faith and credit would result in the largest potential rate increase, and it is the rate increase that is shown in this presentation. So there is a potential, and it would be a minor decrease in the rate increase were we to use full faith and credit for a portion of the debt, but it is a minor increase. So we went ahead and showed you the worst case scenario rate increase. Full faith and credit bonds could allow us to issue a lower amount of revenue-backed bonds. And where this becomes important is that for revenue-backed bonds, most bonding agencies want to see a coverage ratio of 1.5. And I do have that out of order, but the coverage ratio, the reason that that's so important is that shows the bonding agencies our ability to repay that loan. The minimum legal requirement is 1.25. Most bonding agencies want to see a credit rating of about 1.5 or higher. And so we want to be holding in that 1.5 because that really will keep our rates lower when we issue those bonds. However, if we were to utilize full faith and credit bonding for this, it would likely require that the general fund be maintained in a strong fund balance within our currently adopted policies. Were that fund balance to drop below the policies, that would not reflect well on the bonding agencies, and they would likely, it's one of the factors they would look at, and we could pay with extra points on our bonding because of that. So the reason that I bring this up is it could limit council's ability to take action on current issues like the purchase of property or implementation of unhoused services if those actions would require the use of general fund contingencies or fund balances. And again, the rate increases that are proposed don't take into consideration using full faith and credit. They are a worst case scenario. Full faith and credit might allow us to decrease that rate in the future. So on the rate increase specifically, we have worked with FCS to come up with a amount that would allow for debt coverage greater than 1.5 while bonding up to $70 million. The estimated rates would need to be implemented much earlier than I had originally presented to you, and the reason is it just would look better to the bonding agencies and it maintains that coverage ratio as we move forward. But we would want to have that implemented by January of 2026, and it would be 3 years of 2.5% increase in addition to the scheduled CPI or Consumer Price Index inflationary number. I mean, as you recall, in October of 2021, the council did eliminate the 5th year of a 5.28% increase, which was originally implemented to pay for the entire project. So what does that mean? Because it sounds great, right? 2.5% for 3 years is not a lot, but what does it mean to somebody's bill? So when we look at it, our current rate, and we look at an average customer who uses an average of 6 units of water per month, their current portion of the water bill, including the fee in lieu of franchise, is $47.45. As we move across with 2.5% per year plus anticipated CPI, by January 1 of 2028, that bill would increase by $6.78 per month. It is a fairly small rate increase. It would be in addition to, their bill would increase to $54.23, water only portion. That's very important. I'm not showing what the sewer charges are, what the public safety utility fee is on top of this, and the stormwater. There are other components. This is the water only would increase their bill by $6.78 per month. So there is a little good news. Staff have been working with Business Oregon and the EPA, and we have been granted a BABA design waiver, saving the project millions of dollars and months of time in rebidding. BABA is Build America, Buy America, and it was implemented after the city began our project. And our project should have been exempt except for a rule change which was implemented in 2023 or 2024. Now, it is very important to note that the project team and the city fully support BABA, which is the Build America, Buy America, and we are implementing it where we can. However, most water treatment plant equipment is very specialized and very little of it is made in the US. A couple of very specific examples of why this is such good news for the project. Generator alone. When we bid the generator, it was not BABA compliant. But because the generator was such a long lead item, we went ahead and rebid the generator as BABA compliant. The BABA compliant generator was $550,000 more than a non-BABA equivalent. VFDs, variable frequency drives, so all of the pumps are driven by variable frequency drives. The drives that were specified were not BABA compliant, but could be made BABA compliant, and so we looked at that. We have not committed to this one, added an additional $750,000 to the project. So you can see where this was a really important waiver to obtain. And again, the project team will be buying America where they can, but in areas where it does add a tremendous amount of cost, they probably will not be. And so the call to action, I do need direction from you today to keep the project moving forward. And I've broken it down to 3 questions. Do you want to direct staff to initiate the rate review and come back to you with an estimated 2.5% rate increase? We will bring that back in several formats, and I didn't talk about that. I kind of went past it pretty fast. We can structure that rate increase in a number of different ways. We can load it all into the treatment plant replacement fee. We can put some of it into the replacement fee and some of it into the other rates. For the purposes of expediting the analysis, we just went 2.5% on all of the rates across the board to make it easier to analyze. But I figured you would likely want to look at that broken down to what if the treatment plant just picks it up, and then how does that affect an average consumer's bill? So we'll bring back multiple options for your review. The second question is, does the council want to issue bonds in the most effective manner, potentially including FFC pledge, or do you want to direct us to just issue bonds based on revenue, backed by the revenues, not backed on the taxing capabilities? And I'm going to leave it at those 2. If the answers are no, we don't want to do either of those things, then number 3 is kind of the answer, which is you direct me to negotiate completing the project with the current contractor. That is, all of our design drawings, come back with a biddable set of documents. We will negotiate an end to the contract with the contractor, put the project on the shelf until we can save enough money to build it without. And that might be a little bit complicated, but that's where we're at. So those are the 2 questions, and I am here now to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Jason. Questions? I see Rick, then Joel, then Kathleen. So Rick?
Thank you, Jason. On page 15, slide 15. So you talked about build American, buy America.
Yep.
On the variable speed pumps, they consume a significant amount of electricity. So it's my understanding if they're variable speed, it should reduce the electric cost. How does that compare to the cost of the non-variable pump? And is there a significant savings that pays for itself?
Yeah, almost all of these pumps were going to have variable frequency drives anyway, just because the plant flows are so variable and the pumps are so big. So we could never ever just turn one pump on and run. They're so large. So they will have VFDs anyway. There is energy savings, and we are working with the Energy Trust to actually pay for part of that program based on exactly what you just said, that cost savings, and we'll run that. It won't pay for the offset between the $750,000. It would take a lot of years to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Joel?
Jason, I really need the answer to this question, and I don't know that you have it. I would be surprised if you did have it. Looking at the bond discussion and lowering the amount of cash required to maintain the 1.5 coverage ratio. Well, right now, given our general fund and where we're at, what is our coverage ratio right now at the end of this fiscal year, assuming that we had the loan?
So we have to break that into a couple of different pieces, because when we're talking about the 1.5 coverage ratio, that really specifically applies to the revenue bonds almost exclusively.
Okay.
On the water side. So today our coverage ratio is great. As we borrow the remainder of the money, we drop below the 1.25 legal requirement, which is why we need that small rate increase to keep it above that. Our coverage ratio today is probably pushing 1.8 or 2. I was going to say 1.8 or 9. JC just gave me, it's about a 2.0 as it sits today. Until we borrow the additional money and the debt service payments go up, then we don't have that same coverage ratio.
So what I heard you say was we have a really good ratio right now with no
Yes.
bonds issued.
Absolutely.
Which would make a lot of sense. I mean,
Yes.
that's a no-brainer. If we issue the bonds for the needed amount with the rate increase
Yep.
to cover the bonds, we would be right at 1.5 is your estimate.
Initially, it actually climbs a little bit thereafter. But once everything stabilizes, because there's double debt service payments at the very beginning of the project where the debt is kind of overlapped. And then once that first set of loans drops off, the coverage ratio would bump from the 1.5 to about a 1.8.
Okay, thank you.
Kathleen?
Well, I was just curious about this Build America, Buy America. Is that new?
It was implemented after we began the project, so it has to come out in, I want to say 2021, 22, in that range.
Okay.
And it was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL funding that went out. They had added to, so we've always had what's called American Iron and Steel, which when you get federal funds, you always have to use American Iron and Steel, which our project is 100% compliant with. This was really intended to spur much more domestic construction and manufacturing. Unfortunately, for water and wastewater technologies, not a lot of companies have kept up with that, and a lot of our technology comes from outside the country or isn't manufactured. It has to be like 51% in the United States.
Which is possibly coming back. These factories.
Manufacturing, potentially.
Yeah.
It could just take years, though, for that to ramp up, unfortunately.
So I just had another
Yep.
question about the electricity. I know we had approved starting some of that initial electricity
Yes.
that we needed to do some of this. Where are we at with that?
So we actually have placed it on hold until we have this decision. The problem we had was especially once we knew that BRIC funding had gone away, we really didn't want to do anything, and we could not actually start putting the temporary power in until BRIC was 100% confirmed, because that would have constituted, and I'm going to use this term loosely, this is the one thing I'm very frustrated about, starting the project. And FEMA was very adamant we could not start the project until that grant was confirmed. So it's really been delaying us. Now, if we get good affirmative direction today, I'll be notifying the contractor this afternoon, wind it up, let's get this thing underway.
And just
Yep.
one more follow-up question about Build America,
Yep.
Buy America. If we're not going to be able to get things made in America, so is that like irrelevant now because it'll be more expensive to
It's
go
not
that way?
irrelevant. We were issued a waiver by the EPA, so they're okay with us getting what materials we can from what markets we can. They still want to see us make a good faith effort to comply with the rule, and we're going to do that. But a lot of the items, the membrane system is a prime example. We selected the membrane system before, it was after BABA came out, but before the guidance was issued, and it would not comply, but we've designed the entire plant around it, and it cannot be made BABA compliant. It's not possible. So that would mean rebidding the entire membrane system, which involves redesigning the entire plant. So we would be seeking a waiver for like the membrane system regardless of whether we received a design-wide waiver. The design-wide waiver just gives us more flexibility. And as I said, the design team is going to try to comply at where it makes sense, but on big ticket items like that, the VFDs where it's, darn near $1 million just for one item, it makes sense to not buy domestic for those.
I got Rob and then Indra.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Slide 12, please.
Yep. Oops, sorry, right there. That
Okay.
one?
Yes.
Full faith and credit, yes.
Yes. So the middle bullet,
Yep.
it says the full faith and credit bonding would likely require that the general fund maintain a strong fund balance within the currently adopted policies. Can you define what that means? What does strong fund balance
And I'm
mean?
going to look at JC a little bit. Realistically, what it's saying is if you have a fund balance policy that says you're going to maintain 35%, you should not draw below that 35%. If the policy says, and correct me if I'm wrong, 25%, you need to maintain 25%. I believe our current policy says 35%. Sorry, you're going to need English. 25.
25.
Thank you, 25%. So we could not drop it below 25. You could. And the only thing that may come into impact there is the credit rating agencies may look at that and go, well, you have a fund balance policy that says 25, but you're pushing it to 23. Therefore, you may not be as credit worthy as another agency that has a policy at 25 and maintains it at 27. Therefore, you may pay a little bit higher interest on those bonds. You don't have to, but it would definitely account for a much better bonding rating.
Okay. So that leads me to my bottom line question. And my brain doesn't have sufficient neuroplasticity to figure this out on my own here. So when it says could limit council's ability to take action on current issues, et cetera. So let's just say council wanted $5 million for a particular project. How does that affect exactly how does that change our coverage ratio? What is 5 million divided into that total amount?
I'm going to look at JC for that. It does not, you could still do that. It just may limit, especially if you direct us to use full faith and credit. If council was leaning that direction, I think our recommendation would be to lean towards just relying on the water revenues and just do a revenue bond as opposed to a full faith and credit bond.
But my question, without answering my question, I don't know why I should believe you saying that. So if we were to take $5 million out for something, how does that change our coverage ratio?
So let me take a stab at it, and then you follow me up. It does. The coverage ratio is handled much differently. We only look at that on the water side. So if you lower that, it just means that we might pay a higher interest for the full faith and credit bonds potentially. So then, depending on the amount there, I think the lowering of the coverage ratio would be about the same whether you had that or not. You just may be paying a higher interest rate on the full faith and credit. Please back me up because I didn't get all of that.
Yeah, and I think if I'm answering the question correctly, is you can make a reduction in the general fund. It reduces the city's credit score, and ergo the interest rate as part of the calculation of our credit rating is partially calculated based on the policy and where our fund balance sits. So the lower the fund balance, the lower the credit score, so to speak. And so you could change the percentage points as far as the cost on the full faith and credit. So where Jason's saying is if you're going to utilize the general fund, potentially the full faith and credit isn't the best of options because you're utilizing the general fund as backing for the water. Now, if you're not going to touch a general fund and we keep a strong credit rating, it lowers the amount of coverage that the debt needs in the water fund below that 1.5 potentially, and ergo reduces the potential increase that we need to have ratepayers pay.
So I think I understand that. And then again, to be more clear and more direct about my question, so let's just say that we were to reduce our general fund balance by, let's just say, $500,000. Okay, a fairly small percentage for what we're talking about here. How specifically would that affect these computations? I mean, in other words, it's a fairly small amount. Does it still affect? In other words, at what point are we talking that this is actually significant consideration?
It's a good question. I think a small $500,000 amount won't change your calculation from where we currently sit as a pretty high credit rating as far as where it is. It's when you get into the millions of dollars as a decision point.
Okay, so I understand millions, that's plural. How many millions?
Yeah, I would say we've recommended a budget right at that 25%. Now, normally we have some savings there to where we are in the 30s. I believe every $300,000 is a percentage point. So the utilization underneath that starts begging the question of, well, how far do you want to go?
Thank you. The last part answered my question. Thank you.
I got Indra and then Eric.
So on 14 slide, this potential rate impact, is that residential rates only? Does that include business? Do business pay higher rates? How does
So
that?
the 2.5% would be across all customers. So businesses also would pay a higher rate. Generally for these quick analysis, I show a very average single family residential customer because they represent the largest share of your ratepayers. So this is just for a single family residential. When we bring back a full rate schedule, we would also show a commercial customer.
Have you figured that out? Like, do you know offhand in 2028 what the current rate for businesses would be and what that increase would be?
Well, it would be roughly 2.5% to all of their commodities. So If they have a 3/4 meter, they're paying the same 2602. If they have a 1-inch meter, it's probably 70 something. I don't know the rates off the top of my head. They also are paying the same commodity charges. So that part also would go up. They're paying the same treatment plant. It would be very similar to this, but with higher commodity charges because they would use more water.
I got Eric.
Good afternoon, how we doing?
Good.
One question I had, and it was asked to me a couple times previously, is since we're seeing these high costs, would it be worth pursuing figuring out if we can rebuild or go on with the current water treatment plant in light of the high costs increase, all that, in terms of getting the whole thing reevaluated and see, is it worth it, or is it way out of the realm of possibilities?
I'm going to have a hard time answering that. It's not beyond the realm of possibility if that's what council chooses to do. I think if we look back historically, one of the reasons we're where we are today and not in a new treatment plant is because of how many times we have gone backwards to reevaluate whether that was the right decision or not to make. And every time we have done that analysis, we kind of have ended up that, yes, we can invest money in that building, but it is a really bad investment of our money because you're still investing in 80, 100-year-old concrete. You're still in a location that doesn't allow for expansion. There were a lot of reasons those decisions were made. So yes, that analysis can be done again. I think you'll come up with a very similar conclusion.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Very good. Any other questions? Victoria, and then Joel.
Will you tell me about the membrane system again? I know you have before, but explain it to me, please. Or just generally.
Now I wish I'd have brought my model down. I actually have a membrane in my office. So membrane technology is an incredibly, it is a rejection type of technology that uses very, very, very fine membranes. Nothing larger than 0.01 microns can come through that membrane. And so what will be installed will be rack after rack after rack of these plastic tubes with tens of thousands of membranes inside each one of these tubes. And the reason that it's such a positive is because of that pore size. It guarantees a much higher water quality than our current technology does. Guarantees. You cannot push dirt through a membrane. It is physically impossible.
Thank you.
Perfect. Joel.
I was just thinking, how could I push dirt through a membrane?
You cannot.
Okay. So the chart you gave us, and one of the decision points was, do we want to direct staff to initiate the rate review process? So that's information. That's not a decision on to proceed, but we have the potential rate impacts on page, let me put my glasses on.
14.
14. So if the answer to the first question there is yes, how does that differ from what we see on page 14?
It does not. We will do the final analysis and come back to you. What this is showing is a 2.5% increase across the board. Maybe what we end up bringing back is a 5% increase to the water treatment plant replacement fee and a 1% increase to some of the other rates to equal that same 2.5% across the board. The dollar value is what's important. That average of about $6.80 per single family residential, that's the number we have to get to. How we slice that number, for those of you that were here from the previous rate exercises, we brought you back, I want to say 12 or 15 different rate designs. We can customize that. It's still going to get to that same number. It's where we split that up that's going to matter.
So what I hear you saying, Jason, is on the call to action today, if we directed staff to initiate the rate review process, it would be capped by what I see on that page 15 or whatever it is.
I mean, that truly is an estimate, but we're very confident that that number is correct.
Because I would want to avoid the, and this wouldn't be intentional on anybody's part, to do the rate review process and all of a sudden those numbers come back different than what I see today.
They would not.
Okay.
That would upset me as well, Counselor.
Yeah, I understand. I wouldn't be upset, I'd just get even. No, I wouldn't get even.
Any further questions? Victoria?
Oh, never mind, I'll wait. It's a comment.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Jason. Bring it back to council for discussion and/or action. Victoria?
So I think on page 16, if I'm hearing Joel correctly, he may be leaning towards the first option, direct staff to initiate the rate review process. And one thing I'm concerned about is that we have two very important and essential competing, now it appears, issues before us today. And I would want to make sure that we can get through both of those without limiting the second one with the first action that we take. And so it seems like the first option on page 16 would be the most desirable, given the other things we have to deal with today. So just a comment.
Any further discussion? Indra?
Just to kind of say where my thoughts are at, I guess. When the old council did the rate increase for public safety of $12, that was a big deal. And I've been reading about Oregon possibly going into a recession. We know that our economic growth here in our city is not good, that businesses are struggling. I just can't see saddling residents who are struggling to pay water bills already with increased taxes, and businesses especially. I guess I would say maybe a solution is if, as the rates increase, that the $12 decrease so that stayed neutral at $12 would maybe be a solution. But I voted yes when we had the BRIC grant because we need the water system, was my understanding, and we had the money to do it. But this is a lot of money, and we don't have the money to do it without going to the taxpayer, and I just don't think it's a good time to do that. So that's kind of, I'm of the opinion that we should just shelve it for now. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Joel?
Well, I just had a last question for Jason. So the water rates go up a certain percentage each year regardless, correct? Not 20%, but they go up by cost of living?
By what the CPI, whatever the CPI is running.
And so what we see on page 44, is it? No, 14?
Yes, 14.
That does not include the cost of living, so that would be in addition to those.
It does include a 2% CPI increase as well.
Oh, that does include the CPI
Yeah,
increases
essentially
as well.
that is a
Okay.
4.5% increase per year. There's a 2% CPI built into that as well.
Okay, so you did cover both.
We estimate where we think it'll come in. It's coming down right now, so it's hard to say where it'll land by
Sure.
January.
Sure. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I know what I'm looking at.
Absolutely, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Victoria?
So, Jason, if you could remind me again, just looking at page 14 again, we have the increased current rate, but this is for a single family.
Yeah.
This does include the general increase each year, correct? For a business, you gave two examples.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what those are again? Just,
Yeah.
I know I'm not holding you to the exact dollar amount.
Yeah, and I should have thought to do a commercial example. I apologize. So if a commercial business had just a standard 3/4 inch meter, their rate increase would look very, very similar to this, except their commodity charge might be different because they would use more water and they don't pay the stepped rate. But their total charges would go up very similarly. The water, they would pay the same water treatment fee, they would pay the same 3/4 inch meter fee, those are the same. A larger commercial establishment who maybe has a 1 inch or a 1.5 inch meter, they would just see a 2.5% plus the CPI increase to what their base charges are. And I don't know those off the top of my head, I could probably look them up, but if it's $100, it would go up by $100 times 0.045, so I'd go up to 104.5%. Yeah.
Indra, and then Joel?
I would just like to state that while $6 doesn't seem like much, or for business 6 or 12 or 10, when you look at the tax increases that our state of Oregon is pushing down on businesses, a payroll tax increase of 250%, businesses are being crushed. And I just want to say, I don't think it's a good time to burden taxpayers. Thank you.
Joel?
So the other thing, I've been doing some reading on, never mind. But anyway, there's new construction each year. And that results in more revenue for water, correct? And I don't know what percentage that is. So for example, there are those at the federal level, like Indra talked about, that cut taxes, but the tax revenue actually went up because it spurred more activity. And that has happened historically in our country. This assumes that there's no new construction, I would guess, and there's no new revenue from that.
No, the model is actually quite sophisticated and does
Right.
account for customer growth as well as changes in production.
Oh, it does account for
Yes.
customer growth. What percentage is that?
Well, I want to say 1% or just under 1%.
Yeah, it's not, I'm sure it's not significant
No.
for this particular revenue flow. Okay.
Rob, and then Victoria.
So I very much understand everything that Indra, I think all the points that Indra was making. With that said, if we or an individual council believes that our old water treatment plant is to some degree at risk and that we need a new one, and that seems to be what the majority opinion has been for the last 10 years. I think these discussions started in about 2015. For that reason, and because I'm not an engineer, I would tend to agree that our water treatment plant needs to be replaced. And it needs to be replaced kind of the sooner the better. Again, I'm not an engineer. Maybe that's not that important. I'm of the opinion that it should be done, and I'm of the opinion that the fact is the council is the one that would need to do it. So, with that as a given, for me it is. When I look at the most important things that the city or the city council provides to the city, a lot of people might say it's public safety or roads or whatever. I would say water is number one. If water goes out, in an instant, everyone in the city is picking up the phone and dialing City Hall, and that would just take minutes. So water would be number one. I think sewer would be number two. If people's sewers backed up, you'd have the same thing. I think public safety is probably a third behind that, and roads would probably be behind that. But I think water is number one, and I think that we do need to do a new plant to just stop the process now. I don't really see that as a really well thought out position, even though we know that money is very tight for many people. When we did the public safety utility fee, we had many emails and many people comment that they couldn't afford it, and I get that. Nonetheless, I think, especially since it's including the CPI increases, I think a $2 and then a $4 and then a $6 increase over the next 3 years, if that gets us our water plant, I would vote yes for that. As far as which way to fund that, I'm not sure if that's quite as important, but I am in favor of moving forward and getting the new plant online. Again, I'm not one of the ones who believes that the old plant will be fine, even in the case of an earthquake and all that. We've heard those, we've seen those emails, but I'm not one who believes that. So I'd be okay, unfortunately, I'd be okay with what's the situation that is in front of us, which is the administration in Washington killed our FEMA grant. That's a given. We are counting on it. That was a given. We don't have it now, so now the question is, what's the city council going to do? And unfortunately, it's a $2 and a $4 and a $6.78 increase to balance out the fact that Washington killed our FEMA grant.
I got Victoria, Joel, and then Rick.
It is terrible to think that we have to do a rate increase, but water is essential, and it seems like it's a big gamble from what we have heard. If our water fails, water is life, literally, so it's something that we do have to do. So I think we must figure out a way to go forward with it, and so I would be in favor on page 16 of the first option.
Joel?
I certainly understand what Ingrid was talking about, and she's right. And what Victoria and Rob talked about, I also agree that we need to go forward with that. But with that, every $3 million, the way I understand it, is 1% carryover in the general fund. Did I hear that correctly? 300,000? 300,000, okay, that's a big difference. Okay, so 300, I couldn't read my own notes here. So I think this council, and it's tough, because government likes to spend money. Government likes to spend money, and it's not our money. So as we move forward, we need to keep that in mind, and we need to exercise discipline. And perhaps do out of the ordinary with our discipline and our budget, because left unchecked, government will overwhelm the citizens. So I do that with that understanding as we move forward, and that $300,000 is 1% of the general fund, and if we go with a more economical bonding, the way I understand it from what Jason presented, it would require us to keep the general fund up. And that necessarily isn't a bad thing, except that we can't have everything that the citizens or we would like.
Thank you, Joel. Rick?
Several years ago, we were supposed to have a 5th rate increase on the water treatment plant, and we had extra money, and we chose not to go, the council chose not to go forward with that last rate increase. If we had kept that last rate increase, we would not be having this discussion today. And I'm very comfortable with the percentage that we're looking at here, and looking at the entire picture of what's ahead of us. Water is very important, so I'm also in favor of item 1. Thank you.
Any other further discussion? I would be looking to council to have some direction or action. Victoria?
Well, I would move to the first option, have council direct staff to initiate the rate review increase process.
Got a second from Kathleen. Any further discussion? Okay, you have a motion on the table now to direct staff to initiate a rate review process. And any further discussion? With a second? Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll go roll call vote. Victoria?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes?
Seth?
Yes.
Indra?
No.
Thank you. So Jason, you have direction?
I do. Rate increase, yes. Full faith and credit, no.
Yes.
Moving forward.
Thank you. All right, moving on through the agenda. Economic Urban Renewal Agency grants, process and procedures update.
Mayor?
Yes, sorry, Joel.
Oh, before we head to there was two other things that were on here in terms of a call to action. Do we want to issue bonds in the most effective manner, potentially including FFC pledge?
Hey, Joel.
Yes, sir.
We did clarify that by
Okay.
you guys choosing to direct staff to do a rate increase review process, then the other two went null and void.
So they're going to automatically
Yes,
be
you
done?
had three directions to pick, and you chose one direction, and it was majority voted in.
And so if I understand you correctly, then dot number 2 and dot number 3 also get done? Or do they come back to us with the rate increase?
Nope, they're gonna come, staff has been directed to initiate a rate increase review, and then they will come back with their final solidified numbers for you to make a decision on.
So then we'll decide points 2 and 3.
I don't think you're going down that direction.
Yeah, so to clarify, and I apologize, I might have left it a little bit more confusing. I needed decisions on 1 and 2. I heard fairly clearly that general fund wants to have the flexibility to be able to move one direction or the other. And so that means that we will likely take full faith and credit off the table as far as the funding mechanism, and we will only pursue revenue bonding for that. So the first two decisions, I got a good affirmative one. The third one was really only if we didn't execute 1 and 2. And that is for me to negotiate an end of the contract with the current contractor, and we put this project on the shelf.
So then in the motion, do we need to include item 2?
Nope, I took their direction and I am good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Dana Pierce of the Economic Development Division for the Community Development Department. And today we're going to review the Economic Development and Urban Renewal Grants. The council requested a review of the Economic Development Division and Urban Renewal Agency grants. And so this is just primarily an educational presentation to assist the new mayor and council in understanding some of the tools the city has to offer our community. It relates to the council goals of economic growth by encouraging economic vitality, growth, and diversification, and also by helping our downtown to be a vibrant neighborhood and attractive destination. Just a little bit of background. The purpose of grants is really to incentivize development by assisting private investment in public infrastructure and beautification. So it may include capital improvements to what we call blighted areas, underdeveloped areas, or even key commercial and industrial sites. Back in February of 2024, the council supported staff recommendations to consolidate some of the economic development grant programs and establish program models that aligned with the funding sources. So at that time, one of the programs, BRAG and the SDC, were consolidated and had a new max set of $35,000. And those programs also changed the boundary for those grants. So instead of being all over the city, it was outside of the URA, but within the UGB. At that time, also, the council adopted guidelines for the URA grant and loan program. So I'm going to go into a little more depth about each of those. Here's a chart that shows you the breakdown really in a comparison of what our different programs are. You can see the title of the grant and then the purpose and location criteria listed, the match requirements, the limit, so that the top amount of funding any one project can receive, and the funding source, and then the cycle. And those cycles are variable. Some of them are open year-round, others are on a fixed cycle. So I'm going to go ahead and just break it down and look at each one of these. We'll start with urban renewal. This one's a little more in-depth because there are quite a few projects within this program. So this program actually covers 4 different projects in the URA plan, And the highlighted blue bullets are the top projects. So building rehabilitation, North 6th and 7th Street corridor, blighted building removal and replacement, and then the underdeveloped land. So for each of those, if I go in a little more depth, really the building rehabilitation project within this program is focused on removing blight from buildings. It could include safety upgrades and accessibility. So safety upgrades would be things like fire suppression. Let's see if I can, got my notes over here. Assistance with also bringing buildings up to code, seismic improvements, energy efficiencies. Accessibility improvements would include ADA access and elevators. This program also is what most upper story renovations would fall into. And it is for new construction or redevelopment. So that covers that program. The North 6th and 7th Street corridor is really focused more on, it's targeted at businesses in that north end of town. It's really to help beautify the 6th and 7th Street corridors to make it more appealing for visitors. So this program is targeted at beautification and exterior building and site improvements. Those improvements would be in the site of the right-of-way, and they could be hardscaping or sidewalk. Oops, sorry. Or sidewalk improvements. Let's see, and it also includes sign structures, so not the commercial sign itself, but the structure that might hold that sign if it's deteriorating. The next one on the list is a blighted building removal and replacement. So this is really focused at key commercial sites in areas in the city. It can be for demolition, debris removal, or hard costs associated with the removal of a building, but there has to be an eminent plan in order to build something as well. So there has to be replaced, so that there has to be permits pulled within 1 year and construction starting within 2 years for someone to be eligible for this program. And then underdeveloped land is focused more on assistance with infrastructure costs. So that could include reimbursement on SDCs, street and utility upgrades, fire suppression or reimbursement district liens. In the URA plan, this does target the 6th Street area, Redwood Highway, Riverfront, Spalding, and Spalding Industrial, and the Josephine County Fairgrounds. Just stepping back a little bit, some examples of awards that have already been given through this program. The Bohemian was awarded $55,000 for building rehabilitation. So was Dwell House and King's Jeweler Building were each awarded $50,000 for their projects. And then we also get some smaller requests. So Mimosas, they were awarded a $2,500 grant for their project. For the North 6th and 7th Street corridor, we had Cynthia's Home Sweet Home received around $20,000 for their project. And then underdeveloped land, this council approved back in, I think it was either February or March, for the Greenfield RV Park. That was a $50,000 award. Just looking back at the top, you can see the match percentage is 25% on private improvements, and then 50% for public. So it does allow for a little bit more if it's going to be something with public infrastructure. The maximum award is $50,000. The source is URA, and this is on an open cycle, so people can apply throughout the year. This next slide just shows the boundaries. I wanted to show a distinction between where the urban renewal and the UGB, the boundaries are. So the yellow filled in space is urban renewal area. So that's going to cover all of our urban renewal grants. The blue and green outline is the UGB. So any of our other programs, aside from one exception, I'm going to show you the details on it, fall between the urban renewal area and that urban growth boundary on that outside edge. So these are the other two programs that are outside the URA, but within the urban renewal boundary, or the urban growth boundary, is the Business Retention and Relocation Assistance Grant. So this is really focused on infrastructure upgrades and support with either SDCs, so system development charges, street, storm, and utility upgrades, sewer or water lateral installations. This can also include fire suppression installations and upgrades, as well as reimbursement district liens. In this program, it's a 50% match, and the maximum is $35,000. The funding source for this is LB 6381. This program is also an open cycle, so people can apply at any time. This is our lighting the storefront and security camera grant. And this one does have a more specific criteria for location. It's downtown. You can see between C and M streets and 3rd and 8th. The real purpose of this original program was to allow for ambient lighting for inside and outside storefronts to really make our downtown look nice. And then in, I think 2020, they added a security camera element. So under the same program, you can get reimbursed for some lighting costs as well as installing exterior security cameras. The max is 50%, or I'm sorry, the match is 50% on this, and the maximum is $1,000. So if someone spends $2,000, they can get a match of $1,000 reimbursed. The funding source for this is the industrial loan fund and the interest that is accrued on that. Let's see, with the security cameras, I did want to point out that part of this program requires that they consult with the public safety on the location of those cameras so that we can support security downtown. This is also on an open cycle, so people can apply at any time throughout the year. The general commercial building facade matching grant, this is one that is outside the urban renewal area, but within the UGB. And this is really focused on, again, beautification of buildings along public corridors where people can see them in the commercial corridors. Some of the eligible activities are professional design services or other quality exterior improvements. Could be windows and doors, awnings, porches, and balconies. It can also include decorative detail like cornices, entrances, and sign restoration. Painting and masonry repair are also included as eligible activities under this program. And similarly, this is a 50% match. The maximum is $5,000. And the source for this is the industrial loan fund interest as well. This one got moved to an annual cycle, so one time a year the application would open up. We would be doing a comparison and awarding based on the amount of funds that are available. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that as we go along here too. The final one I wanted to review here is the Tourism Promotion Grant. So this is really promotional funding to attract tourists. So it's focused on events and activities that would attract people from 50 miles away or at least lead to an overnight stay. And the funding is specific to marketing those events and activities to draw tourists. Some of the examples of promotional activities that could be the funding could be used for would be print materials, newspapers, magazines, postcards, mailers, as long as it's going beyond that 50-mile reach. Digital media can assist with video production, paid social media ads or improvements to websites. Also, audio marketing like radio ads and podcasts are another example of ways you could use this promotional funding. In this case, there is no match for the funding that they receive. The maximum, though, is $5,000. It's funded through the lodging tax, and we have a semi-annual cycle, so it opens up in July and January each year. We run a cycle. This council awarded the January cycle in March. 7 individuals received funding for promoting events in Grants Pass. And I guess I should just list a few of those previous awardees. We did have the Southern Oregon Horse Racing Association for racing on the Rogue, Grants Pass Museum of Art, Rogue Valley Classic Cruisers, Back to the 50s show. The Grants Pass High School Band Boosters received some funding for the Pride of the Northwest. Another example is Spirit of the Fair. So we have lots of different programs receiving these funds. This is just a quick rundown of the marketing strategies that we use. For those open cycle grants, the guidelines and applications are posted on the website, so someone can find that anytime. And most of the time, those programs, people come either referred by a community partner or word of mouth, or just calling and asking. A lot of people just call and say, hey, I've heard that there's some assistance, what do you have available? When it comes to those cyclical grants, we do a little more marketing outreach where we would post in social media because those cycles are, only open for 6 weeks, so we want to make sure people know that it's open. We do have some brochures for our programs. The Chamber's a great partner. They always post in their newsletter when we have open cycles, or even the urban renewal one is continuously being marketed and posted for businesses in town through that method. Newspaper and sneak preview, radio, those cost money, so we don't always advertise, but we do put out press releases that often get picked up, or we get an opportunity to speak on the radio, get a little spotlight. And then I guess community meetings and committee meetings, we always will announce when we're out and about those different programs that we have running. We do have an intention to do an urban renewal mailer, so that's something we'll do this year to try and get the word out to all of our urban renewal properties about the grant program. I think that covers all of it for now. I'm going to move to the next. This is just a rundown of the application process. So typically, to complete the Economic Development Division application, it's submitted with the site plan. So they have a project they're doing, they're submitting their site plan, and then simultaneously they're going to apply for one of these assistance programs. We are considering switching to an online form. We do have a draft of it. Right now it's just a paper form. People can print it and handwrite and then submit that way. Awards for $25,000 and below are approved at the staff level, and then awards exceeding the $25,000 are reviewed by staff and then brought to council for final approval. And then the tourism promotion application, it's slightly different because it is on that cycle. It does have an online form that's published when the cycle opens, so July 1 and January 1. It's reviewed by a grant review subcommittee, and then the recommendations are brought to council for approval. As far as cost implications go, these numbers are what we're recommending in FY26 budget, and they are reflective of what has been approved in the past. So for the URA, $250,000 has typically been approved to award for the various grants that you saw in the program. For this fiscal year, so FY25, so far, 6 awards have been made. There's another one coming before council in June, so if all of those are approved, it will be about $215,000 that was awarded in FY25 for the urban renewal. If approved, the FY26 would allow for if at the maximum level, $50,000 would allow for 5 grants, but you can see we have a variation. Some people get smaller grants, and so we ended up being able to award up to 7 in this last fiscal year. Looking at the BRAG program, so that's the LB 6381. This is the current balance, so $176,717. We did not issue any grants through the BRAG this last year because of the shift in the programming. We also have, I guess just, we didn't mark it. We shifted from being on an open cycle to a set cycle, and so we will open that on July 1 this year to run a new program for that. I'm sorry, that was a mistake. The BRAG is actually open year-round, so that's not on a cycle. We just didn't have anybody that applied, I guess, not in that case. So we could make an effort to market that one a little more. With the amount that's remaining, we have, if we were to have $35,000 maximum, that would be 5 awards. This money doesn't have a renewable source, so we would just sunset the program once those awards were made. And then looking at the industrial loan fund, the $7,000 that's set aside there, This is the one I was going to tell you. There is we have made a policy decision to run this program off of the interest of the industrial loan fund, but we dropped below the 500,000 minimum that we were trying to maintain to be able to run those programs. We've decided to run them minimally, so there would be available one award of $5,000 for the building facade grant, and then up to 2 awards for the lighting program. And we'll do that to try and maintain it until the interest comes back up a bit, and then we'll be able to make those programs a little more robust again. However, we didn't want to eliminate them because they've been longstanding programs. And then the final one was the $35,000 that has been set aside the past few years for the tourism promotion grant. And so far, we have maximized that, and the past 2 years, and each year have awarded 9 different entities grants for promoting their events. Let's see. I think that's it on that one. So the call to action is really at council discretion. Your alternatives are to affirm our current grant programs, or we can discuss potential changes. We can also set a council workshop to have further discussion. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Dana. Victoria and then Indra.
Which one was it that you said wasn't awarded? I'm sorry, I just went past me, and you were saying maybe we could advertise that more. Which was?
That was the business retention and relocation grant. So the location criteria changed to be outside of the URA, and then but within the urban growth boundary. I'd say one of the reasons why a lot of people aren't accessing it is because a lot of our commercial area is included in the urban renewal, so that a lot of people have just shifted to that other program. But I have had some inquiries, they just haven't applied yet, so I do know there is some interest, but it would be nice to share it out.
Indra?
Thank you for your presentation. So I have a question on the urban renewal grant and loan program. Is there, so you mentioned the RV park of 50,000 that was recently awarded. Is there any mechanism for making sure that what is presented to the council and on the application is actually what is followed through when the development occurs? And what if that is different? Is there any accountability for that?
I would say yes. I'm administering the program, so I review all the receipts, and then I also, my director also reviews them as well. So everything has to be in alignment with whatever that award was. In the case of the Greenfield, it was a reimbursement for SDCs. So we saw those SDC costs come in, it was eligible and was able to be reimbursed. Yeah.
I think the key is to that, Counselor, is
Yeah.
it is on a reimbursement perspective. They don't get the grant. We just give them $25,000. They have to spend the dollars, do the development, and then get the reimbursement. And so we have the ability to track that through the reimbursement process.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. So are there cases where if the development is not what was presented or on the application, it's like, say it's not for tourists, but for permanent something, do we have the ability to stop those funds from being waived and get that money back?
I'm not sure if I have.
Well, I can jump in. I think there's a couple of mechanisms at play there. One is on the site planning permitting side, and then the other is on the grant side. So if I hear your question, Council, you're talking about if the grant is approved for a specific project, then do we have the ability to essentially repeal the grant?
Let me just be clear, I guess, because maybe you're not aware of what information I have, and maybe I'm incorrect, but I want to make sure. So on the RV site, when we were presented and given the application, it said for tourism and business to come through downtown, which was great. We voted unanimously to do that. And then later, information I got and that was written is there is a plan to put permanent modular homes up there. which is not, to me, tourism. So that's what I'm asking. Do you check on that? Because I wouldn't have voted for that if I knew that was happening. I thought it was strictly for tourism to come into, and visitors, I think is what it said, to come into our town. So I was a little dismayed to see that. And so I'm wondering, I spoke to a couple of people, but nothing came of it. So I'm wondering if you're aware of that, and is there a mechanism to look for that? And for future, if other grants come through that aren't accurate in what they're putting down.
Yeah, the planning division has not received any indication through the application process, through an amendment process, that the original RV site plan is going to change.
Okay, and if that does happen, would the grant?
It would be a first. I mean, I think we'd probably just have to, at staff level, talk it through. I certainly feel like there would be an obligation from staff to formally notify council so that you would have that opportunity to review and discuss that. I mean, that maybe the city manager has another thought.
Yeah, I think Bradley's spot on. If they change their plan and they have to come in and do a new site review, and they've gone from RV park to permanent housing, and they want to do a subdivision now, well, in that case, the grant probably doesn't apply because it's not RV. If they're able to follow through with the planning process and it's in line with what it was permitted for, then likely it was probably in line with what the original grant application was for also, which was for the permitting of RV sites.
Thank you so much for clarifying. I have another question, that's okay, on the map. So I'm just wondering, on the URA and UGB, well, the URA boundaries, the yellow. So I'm just wondering why on the 199, it's on the north side, but not on the south side as well.
The boundary was established when they set the urban renewal plan. So when they went through that process, they identified every property that they would include. And so I couldn't tell you exactly why that decision was made, but what's on the north? Some of it may have to do with the availability of property too. Especially I think where the spot you're looking at, there are some opportunities there for because of the zoning for other activities like residential and things like that. I don't know the exact answer, to be honest, because I wasn't here when they developed the plan, but they have over time incorporated additional parcels and shifted a little bit, just depending on what was needed or what they thought might be a project that could be included.
Okay.
There is some flexibility there.
it seems sad that one side doesn't get anything and the other side does. So maybe that's something to look at.
It is true, and I've even had certain cases where there was a property that was one property over from the urban renewal. So then instead we look at the other economic development programs and see if those can assist. So the good part about shifting the economic development programs to outside that boundary allows for at least some assistance.
Kathleen?
So Dana, I was looking at the light the storefronts and security camera grant, and I was wondering, it seems like that's really low for maybe the amount of people that would want to access that. Is there any way to increase that?
Yeah, it's really a policy decision, I guess. At this point, the decision that was made before was to run the programs off of the interest from the industrial loan fund. The council could make a decision to increase that amount and lower the threshold, I guess, for the principal amount for that fund, or, it's really up to you to decide.
If I could just add, I think it's important to, underscore that all of these economic development programs are really at the discretion of council. The policies that Dana is conveying today, were established by prior councils, but none of them are regulated by the state or any other body. So yeah, we have, there's a lot of opportunity to, to review and modify and amend the policies that you're seeing today.
I'm going to add just a little bit more to that for the Industrial Downtown Loan Fund. It has no revenue source, so no money is coming in other than the interest, which is why she's speaking to that. The interest for this program is super important. And so to build that fund balance back up to around $500,000, they had to cut back on the program just a little bit.
So in the past, it's been higher?
Yeah, we found an accounting error in the last fiscal year that a grant was supposed to be paid from this fund, and so it lowered that fund balance down below $500,000. And so we're trying to keep it at $500,000, kind of like an endowment would be, so that way you don't touch the $500,000, and then they can utilize the interest off the top to run the program.
So in the next year, it could be up again?
It could be.
Any further questions? Joel, and then Eric.
Good presentation, and you do a lot of good with people, and we can do even better, and that's wonderful, what you do. I was wondering on the Urban Renewal Grant and Loan Program, it's actually what the citizens fund and you administer it. So the citizens, you got to give them credit for paying their taxes. Yeah. Under Urban Renewal Grant and Loan Program, there's on 6th and 7th Street corridor, there's the beautification and streetscaping. Have we had any grants associated with that, and what is that?
Yeah, we've only had one award so far that has gone towards that, but it really is essentially a building facade type program. It's really to beautify 6th and 7th Street. So we think about our visitors coming in on 6th Street. We want to make sure that the buildings look nice. And there's also some room in here for the public infrastructure side of it, including sidewalks, other hardscape, planters and things to make it look nice along there. We haven't had many folks engaging that quite yet. We are doing an outreach that actually tomorrow, a real talk with the kind of the north end of town to get some input. So that might be a good opportunity for us to ask and see if there are some people interested.
So an example, it might be one of the more extravagant examples would be All Care and what they've done in the front of their business. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good example. They didn't access urban renewal for their project, but sure. A lot of the people that are reaching out to me are people that maybe have a smaller building that they're trying to fix up and remodel to look nice. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Eric?
Great presentation. Thank you for that. I had a question in terms of popularity. I'm not sure if that's the correct term here, but most utilized, I guess, grant that we have here. Do you have a background or a history as far as what's been most desired, I guess is a word, so that we can make a decision and see if we can try to get more allocations to that specific grant?
Sure. For the urban renewal program, primarily the top one is the building rehabilitation. People want assistance with upgrading their buildings. A lot of those folks are required to put in fire suppression, and that's very expensive, so this helps cover some costs like that. So I'd say that's the primary one that people are accessing. However, some of these still have great benefits. They're just, it has to be the right situation for it to work out. So for like the blighted building removal and replacement, there may be a situation, if that comes up, we would want that still to be available, to assist with that project, because that could mean if you're thinking about, let's say, 6th Street and an old building that's run down, and we hear someone says, I'm going to come in and I'd like to take that building down and build something new, we want to incentivize that too and encourage it. But I would say that's probably the number one. This is a fairly new program, so historically people were actually accessing the BRAG program, the Business Retention and Relocation Grant. That was more heavily funded prior to. So like you said, as that gets spent down, you start to have to make decisions about how things are spent and awarded. But in this case, right now the urban renewal really does cover, though, the majority of our commercial properties and our industrial properties. So it is, most of the properties are going to really fall into this program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kathleen?
So I had a follow-up question about the blighted building removal and replacement. They have to have a plan to build within 2 years.
Yeah.
What's the incentive for people to actually get moved in that direction if they have a blighted building? I can think of several on top of town, 6th Street, that have been there forever, and nothing's happening.
Yeah. Well, it's something that we can offer as an incentive. Obviously we can't control what private property owners choose, so we definitely explore those options. We talk to different property owners. We are in touch with other commercial real estate folks, and we're asking those same questions, trying to see if there's a way to work with those property owners. But in some cases, whatever they're doing with their property, it may not be enough incentive to do something, or they might have some other plans. So, but by having it available, it at least gives an option or some level of incentive to move on it if someone comes about that says, hey, I really want to develop this property, or I want to purchase this, what can I do?
Do you connect people with buildings and businesses that are just vacant for extended period of times? Do you connect people that want to create something?
Yep, we do that as much as we can. It really is dependent a lot on the property owner and being able to get in touch with them and find out what their needs are. Or it kind of goes both ways, I guess, like you said, because someone might come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at this property, what do you know? And if I have a contact, I'll help assist. Yeah.
It just seems like possibly some of these properties, the people don't even live here, so they're not looking at it every day. And how can you increase the need for something to happen? I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, increasing demand to some extent. And we have partners that are looking at the same thing. We're out there working with the property owners and trying to make that connection for sure.
Any further questions? Victoria?
What would be staff's recommendation for going forward? Just a general, what would your recommendation be if you were to say, this sounds like a really good way for you guys to go with these funds?
Well, thank you for asking. I think, right now the programs are working, and they kind of do evolve as you move forward. You learn where there's pieces that have hang-ups, and you can try and make those modifications as you go. But I think, the things seem to be functional. We have a plan of action for doing more marketing and getting the word out about some of these programs. If there's any recommendation from council on improvements they'd like to see, I'd love to hear them.
Go ahead, Brad.
If I could, Mayor, so there's been, various forums over the last 6 or 7 years since the URA has been in place. I mean, we're talking about more than URA today, but for just the URA piece, I think your question kind of relates to a philosophy, if you will, almost, about how urban renewal works. I know Aaron has commented on this before as well, that, we have allocated a relatively small amount to the private sector that can tap into this. There's still a significant portion of the URA money that can be used and really should be used, for those catalyst projects. And we do have a 5-year implementation plan for the urban renewal, which talks about those catalyst projects. So could the council decide to allocate more money for grants to the private sector using URA money? Yes. Are we at a point in the in the evolution of the urban renewal 30-year plan, you know, where we need to be really choosing where to put the catalyst money? Yes. So it's, you know, it's always this sort of back and forth. So I think we haven't tapped out the 250,000 for the URA yet. So it seems to be somewhat of an indication that it's a good number. We're pushing up against the 215, 220 this year, so that seems to be keeping that allocation amount seems to be good. But we do have that 5-year implementation plan that we're working on, and I think we're fairly soon going to be talking about the Washington property, you know, which again is urban renewal, and that will also be utilizing the same pot of money.
Thank you, Brad. You guys fully understand that? So what I got out of Brad saying is because you have a 25% allocation per private and 50% for public, there could be an opportunity to change those percentages to spur growth. That's the way I understood that. Any further questions? All right, thank you. Oh wait, I had a question for you, because you basically started out the presentation, you said this was informational only, but then you do have a call for action for, so which is it? Do you need direction for going away from this, or this, are you contingent with this just being informational only?
I'm good with that. It was just that opportunity, if there were pieces that you'd like to modify or see changed.
Okay.
Would be.
Thank you for the clarification.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I bring it back to council for further discussion and or action. Yes, Victoria.
Well, I think it would be great for us to be able to hear a presentation on these catalyst projects coming up soon. So that would, when it says set council workshop for further discussion, we could turn it into that. That sounds like a good direction to me.
Any further discussion? Seth?
Yeah, I'd be for that. I mean, I would like to keep obviously everything going as is. I'd also like to spend some time just talking with some of the applicants and just, you know, seeing what they liked about it, if there's any changes they'd like to see as well.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, so I will leave it open table here. Do you guys want to direct staff to further investigate, or do you want to leave it as is? Eric?
I think setting a workshop for further discussion, like Victoria was saying, and also a little bit like what Seth was saying there would be perfect.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, could we get a few, or I don't know, 1 or 2 applicants if they're willing to come in and, you know, I know Scott at Partake has a good plan, so it could be an option to, I don't know, yeah, just get some more information on what's going on.
Indra?
And perhaps just a little bit more detail on, I know you listed how you get the information for the grants out, but I just still have a feeling that a lot of businesses don't know what's available to them. In my mind, there should be no reason why all of that money isn't gone the way that businesses are now. So if that would be possible, great, thank you.
All right, so it sounds like we do have a few counselors that want to go in a direction of presenting, having another workshop with more information to be presented. So any further discussion with that? Joel?
Well, it's really the citizens that make the program work. We just make it available, so I think it would be good to have that feedback and input from the citizens in a free society that have chosen to do that and further their business in their town. So that's wonderful that we would do that.
Perfect. So with the sentiment on the table right now, it sounds like that we have some staff some counselors that want the staff to have another presentation with further information. With that, I'll see if we can get a consensus here. Victoria?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
Seth?
Yes.
Indra?
Yes.
All right, do you have direction? Thank you. Moving on, we have, through the agenda here, consideration of alternative approach for low barrier shelter acquisition and operations. And with that, I will hand it over to Stephanie.
Turn it on. Good afternoon, Mayor, Councilors. This is, I guess, part one of the homeless solutions discussions that we're going to be having today. So we'll start with your preview. This is designed to give you an option to pursue for getting something in place to hopefully alleviate the need for the city to provide any resting spaces. Some things have been coming up, as we all know, over the past couple of months. Options have been brought up, discussed a little bit, nothing clear, and there's been a lot of pushback on some of those options. And so we wanted to present something that will hopefully alleviate some of those concerns that we've been hearing and give you a path forward so we can move quickly here. So the purpose for today is to recommend establishing a grant program to provide funding for provision of services to homeless individuals. This relates to Council's goal of housing and homelessness by being an active partner in developing a robust community system of health, homelessness, housing stability services, which creates a continuum of care to support homeless individuals and families at risk of or experiencing homelessness. If you'll recall, that's your outcome 2 from your recently adopted strategic plan. And that's important because we're going to talk about all of those outcomes and impacts that we wanted to see as we go through this discussion. No matter what the council decides, there's going to be a cost implication. If the city wants to regulate homeless use of city property, there are going to be financial costs. Currently, the city-funded resting sites, the proposed budget for fiscal year 26 recommends $371,000, and that doesn't address all of the costs. That it doesn't address the employee parking that's being rented, actual staff time that's being put forward on all of these various issues. None of that's factored into that budgetary consideration. So it's actually a much higher cost to the city every year. The alternative would be to help a program get up and running to serve the needs of the homeless population long-term and be able to reduce that financial cost to the city going forward. So the amount set aside to establish a grant program like being proposed today would be at council's discretion. And we'll talk about that last. So the very last thing after we talk about all the other potential considerations is to talk about money and how much you might want to do. As we all have talked about repeatedly, and we're going to talk about probably ad nauseum this evening, Oregon law requires that there be some reasonable way for a homeless individual to sit, lie, sleep, and keep warm and dry if a jurisdiction is going to regulate doing so on public property. In order to eventually enforce regulations, the city has been forced into city-provided resting sites that consolidate the homeless population without any services. We have 4 sites. We have a large population there and nothing other than just a place for them to be. As we talked about already, in recent months, several options have been brought forward and a number of concerns have been raised about those. So let's talk about those options. I always start coughing when I'm up here. Probably the first one that came to light was for the city to purchase or lease real property and have a single entity providing services on that property. That kind of morphed more recently into maybe we just provided some grant funding to a single entity in order to provide services without actually going through any kind of a competitive process. And what we're here to talk about today is that competitive grant program that would allow basically any entity to demonstrate to the city why it could meet the city's needs and alleviate the homelessness issue. Some of the comparisons, and just to be clear, there is no guarantee that any of these options will eliminate homeless individuals in Grants Pass or allow the city to completely disallow camping on city property. We don't know what the courts are going to say because they haven't said it yet, but we can try, and we can try to minimize or completely eliminate our issues. But any of these options will provide some relief for the city, hopefully a lot of relief. The first and probably the most concerning from my perspective as the city attorney is the risk and liability of each of these options. Purchasing and leasing real property puts the city at a lot of risk. We would be potentially looking at having our name associated with whatever happens on that property because we'd be the owners. Anything happens on that property, we are named in the lawsuit. That's not usually a good thing because we would have no control over what was actually happening. If we provided grant funds to a single entity with no competition, there's less. How much less, I'm not sure. But there would probably still be some because we would be funding something just as a single project without hearing from other entities that may be able to provide the same services in a different way or at a different cost. With a competitive grant program, there would be minimal. I'm never going to say there's going to be no risk or liability for our decisions, but minimal is about as good as we can get. If we open it up and allow for various options to come forward and then pick the one that best meets the city's needs, that's the best use of our time to minimize risk and liability. There's been questions about how we would ensure services. If we were to provide real property to a single entity, it would be through a service agreement, which means we would basically be the ones telling them what they have to do. And that's, again, that goes to our risk and liability as well, because if we're the ones deciding what that's going to be, then we're the ones who are picking and choosing what happens, and we're responsible for that to some extent. With a grant agreement and performance standards, there's a little bit less, but we can still ensure those services. But with a grant agreement and performance standards, usually that is dependent on what they have said they will do. So we are just holding them to doing what they've told us. There's been questions about whether or not these options provide equal treatment to entities within our community. The first two, the answer is no, because we're not hearing from everybody. We're not giving everybody the same opportunities. With a competitive grant program, you would be. You'd be saying, anybody can apply, show us what you can do, and we're going to then move forward with the best solution. There's been questions about the transparency of decision-making, and to date, the answer would be no on providing single property. There hasn't been a lot of in-public city council discussions about that option. There's been a little bit about a grant to a single entity, but not a whole lot, not much more. With a competitive grant program, essentially today, we would be having that transparent decision-making about what we wanted and how that would work. And then allowing for unconsidered options. There's been a lot of talk in various forums, whether it's been during city council meetings or in the press or other public venues, they're about certain options, but we're not really hearing from those smaller options. We haven't heard from any alternatives for the most part. We're just hearing about a single solution with some pushback. So a competitive grant program would allow us to consider those unconsidered options if they may want to apply for some of the grant funding that's available. An overview of what the grant program would look like. The city would set aside an amount of money that would be available to fund one or more grant proposals. We would establish minimum eligibility requirements. We would establish what the need to be addressed is, what the funding could and could not be used for, what a successful applicant must demonstrate, and what weight we would give to those considered components, and what they would need to do before or while receiving funds. So that would be things like grant reporting and things like that, demonstrating that they are making a difference and using the money in the way it was intended. There would be scored proposals, and the grant funds would be awarded to one or more proposals that demonstrated it could meet the city's needs. In order to put something together like this, there's a lot of direction that is needed. And whatever the need is determined to be, there's going to be objective measures of success attached, potentially strings attached to for recovery in the event of failure to complete the promised work or achieve the objective thresholds. So the questions, and I think if it works for the council, we'll go through this one slide at a time for discussion of each of these needs rather than going through all the various questions and trying to jump back and forth. So the first and probably the biggest question is, what does the city want to achieve? Is it removal of homeless populations from city property? Is it reduction of the homeless population within the city itself? Is it a reduction in crime and/or nuisance matters? Is it that services get provided to homeless populations, which I think ties into the reduction of homeless population to some extent? Are there other outcomes that you can think of? It's really, we need to define what we want, what needs to happen, that outcome, not necessarily the solution, and let those service providers define or demonstrate why what they are proposing helps achieve the city's goals. So with that, I guess, I am going to jump one slide ahead, though, because this relates to your needs. Your outcome 2 results in initiatives from your strategic plan. 2.1 and 2.2 are to decrease the number of individuals and families at risk of or experiencing homelessness and improve the quality and safety in unhoused services. So keeping those 2 things in mind, that's how you can define your need. And the A, B, C, and D that are listed on here are ways that you could potentially do that. And a grant program would fall within all of those. So I'll jump back. Any questions, comments on needs?
So I'm going to have a comment to the council. Just reminding you that this is a public recorded session, so please make sure that your words are thought out before spoken. And remember, your attorney-client privilege needs to be upheld as well. With that, first question, Victoria?
I'll wait. It's more of a comment. Thanks.
Further questions? Indra?
I have a question on, back to the options. So, in the law, it says warm and dry if a jurisdiction regulates doing so on public property. So would not an option, and I'm not advocating for or against, but I'm just saying, would an option be to not regulate?
Yes. I think if we choose not to regulate where a person can camp, essentially, then we would not have to meet those objectively reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. But I think given past discussions, that's not an option that this council has been willing to consider, and it still has other risks and problems associated with it as well.
So can you, and I understand that you get feedback from the council, and I understand that, but it is an option, I think, that the public should be aware of. Can you speak to the risk, liability, all of that as it relates? And maybe you can, I'm sorry, I probably should have brought this up to you before the meeting, but can you address the risk, liability, all of that for that option as well? Or are you not prepared for that?
I'm not particularly prepared for it. I can do just a little bit for you. If you were to essentially eliminate the restrictions on the code that we just revised, there would still be some risk and liability. And in particular, one of the concerns would be more homeless would be coming into our city, most likely, because if there's no restrictions on it, the parks are going to remain full. They're going to, all the things that we're hearing complaints about are going to stay in place. And then we may potentially see issues happening on public property.
Okay, so if this is being presented to the public as options, could that option also be included with your, in the column? That's all I'm asking. Is that possible?
I could do that.
Thank you so much.
Any further questions? Joel? Okay, we're going to stick to the questions. It sounds like Stephanie wants to go through this kind of line by line so we don't get distracted, like we don't forget what we're doing. So when we go to question period, let's try to keep it to the small topic at hand. Any further questions in regards to this? Proceed.
I'm good with doing comments on each of these slides too,
Okay.
just to see, because I'm trying to find the direction on each of these topics, and
Okay.
the direction on this one may guide the rest of our discussion in
So
particular.
we'll just leave it as like kind of an open back and forth. If that's good with you, then I think, what do you think, Aaron?
Or it could be as an alternative, we go ahead and finish with the
Finish it off.
presentation. We get confirmation that council may want to go this direction. If they do, then we just have some additional follow-up questions that you have highlighted in your slides.
I can do that. I'll go through everything, and then we can jump back and go through the questions as we need to. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So the big one is the city's needs. From there, we would need to determine eligibility. What types of entities should be eligible to apply? Is it going to be nonprofits? Can individuals apply? Community groups, businesses, others? And should we require partnerships, collaborations, or at least encourage those through awarding additional points if there's a collaboration effort involved? We would need to define our allowed and unallowed uses. What can city funding be used for? Can it be real property purchase or lease, other purchases, construction or renovation, provision of services, operations? Are there things that city funding cannot be used for? I think one that's come up before is needle exchanges. So are there things that we would want to say absolutely yes or absolutely no on, and we could outline those? And we could restrict it. It doesn't have to be broad. We just have to decide what those funds could be used for. Some of the considerations about an award would be, should the money be available as an advance or in a reimbursement form? Should it be a one-time payment, periodic, or milestone-based, or does it really depend on the proposal and what they're suggesting and how it might work based on that? Should there be a cap on the award to a single applicant? And I think that part of that goes to how much the city sets aside. The larger the amount, the more likely it is we could have multiple awards, and you may want to consider a cap on those. Should the city require any match components? And how long should an applicant have to claim the funds? If they say we're going to do this project, when do they have to start? When do they have to start requesting those funds to be received? We would need to determine what constitutes a successful applicant and what they would need to demonstrate. So I think the big questions, at least from my perspective, would be, how does their proposal address one or more city needs? Are they meeting our needs? Because that's why we would give them money. How will they work with the surrounding community to minimize adverse impacts, hopefully to alleviate and minimize what the neighbors are going to think about what's going on? Is there a way that they can find to work with those neighbors? Do they have additional sources of funding or a continuing operations plan? I think they would, if we're trying to set something up that's going to be a long-term goal by the city providing upfront funding, they would need to be able to demonstrate that they can then continue that after the city funding is gone. Do they have collaborations or partnerships? Are they in agreement with, or do they have requested revisions to a draft grant agreement? We would put that out as part of it to say this is what we would expect you to agree to. And then are there timelines or milestones that need to be tied to the funding? And that may be project dependent, or it may be something that the council wants to establish up front. Generally, my recommendation would be to tie payments to milestones and set events as opposed to giving money up front or just giving money on a regular basis. There needs to be some demonstration that they're doing what they need to do. And then are there any other things that we want to think about as far as what has demonstrated that somebody's going to be successful in helping the city meet its homelessness issues? We would need to talk about application timeline, and should there be a single deadline for an application or a rolling deadline? We've got the grant programs where it's just as they come in, they get reviewed. Is that something we want to do here? My recommendation on this would be a combination, kind of like they do with large department head type positions. You have a first review where anything that comes in is that first chunk you look at, but if you don't have enough out of that, then you can keep reviewing as they come in from that point forward until all the funds are allocated. And then the last and biggest question that I know is on everybody's mind is, how much money do you make available if you're going to do this? And we do have, if you have questions about that, JC, I know, has some potential information. At least he was made aware that this question was on the slide, so he should think about it. So then we have the options for today. We can establish a grant program and proceed based on today's discussions. We can return with a draft of what that grant program would look like, a more detailed one based on today's discussions. We can come back after community forum, either with or without a draft, if you want to get more input from the community about what their thoughts are. Or you can say we're going to go with a different option and we'll call it for today. Just to give you an idea of what we would be looking at, these are I'm not going to say set in stone timelines, but these are timelines I believe could be met with a lot of work. If we had either the go-ahead today, you wanted to come back and review a draft in 2 weeks, or if you wanted to have further discussion further out. So with that, now I've got questions and further discussion, and we can.
Thank you,
move on.
Stephanie. Let's just start, we'll go piece by piece. Go back to the options slide. Okay, so I know, Indra, you had some discussion and questions in regards to options. Did anybody else want to have any questions or discussion in regards to these options that were presented? We're just going to go piece by piece through this. Joel and Victoria?
Okay, I just say that the competitive grant program looks like the way to go.
Okay, Victoria?
Yes, I completely agree. Looking through your packet, thank you for the presentation. I looked through it, and I came up with 6 points that I think that might be something that could be given to staff with some direction. And I have some, I'd like to just read through it, and I have copies of it.
Can we present that further on in the presentation?
Well, I think it might take care of a lot of things, and maybe it won't, but yeah, I'd sure love to be able to do it now if I could. So, go ahead. Okay, thank you. So, definitely a competitive grant, I believe, is the way to go. So this would be a request for proposal grant summary for homeless navigation center and resting site with 6 points. For consideration of staff. And number 1 would be that council will vote to direct staff to create a request for a competitive grant to be awarded to a selected organization for the purpose of running and managing a site, which would include a low barrier option and a navigation center. And the grant purpose would be to fund or help to fund the purchase of land and/or infrastructure for the development of a managed resting site and a navigation center to assist individuals experiencing homelessness to move to permanent housing, addiction recovery, employment, etc. Services should include but not be limited to 24/7 on-site case management, peer support, rules of engagement, opportunities for transitional housing, and navigation services. Compliance requirements should include the applying organization must collaborate with the appropriate city entities such as planning and fire and police to ensure the plan would meet all ordinance requirements. To begin with or ramp up to serve 150 people to ensure ADA compliance and to meet all zoning and ordinance requirements, or that the plans are in place to ensure this will happen. Number 4, the submission deadline. The proposal must be submitted to the council on or before, in a special meeting, the regularly scheduled June 2nd, 2025 council meeting. Number 5, the grant amount determination. Council should suggest an up to amount for the grant. And lastly, number 6, the application process. The grant opportunity should be offered through an open request for proposal, an open application, open to everyone, open RFP process that must be submitted on or before June 16th with the intention of awarding the RFP June 16th in the regular or a special meeting. And these were meant to be a starting point, but I think it really goes through the presentation that Stephanie presented to us with a really good starting point. So I just kind of open it up for everyone's input or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize if we were talking over here. We're just trying to get some clarity on how to go forward. And I think what I'd like to do is stick with the options page right here and get council's opinion if you want to proceed in one of the 3 directions here, and then we can kind of tailor it down a little bit more. So with that being said, that's what I'm going to call for action next here. So if you have any more further discussion in regards to that, Joel and then Indra.
I'm just taking it one step back, if you can bear with me, Mayor, and it won't take very long.
Sure.
So in terms of planning, there's two ways to do things. One is the direct scientific method or the indirect scientific method. With the direct scientific method, you have a hypothesis, which is, as we work on this, this is what we put forth as a hypothesis of how to handle the situation. And then you present that to the public, and you get feedback on that because they have a little better idea of what you're talking about. Now, the other way of doing it, and it is a little more inefficient, is you have no hypothesis, and you just open it up for public input, maybe on criteria or other things like that. But they both get you to the same place. So if we realize that what we're talking about here still needs to go through public involvement as a hypothesis, and it doesn't have to be take 6 months. It can take one meeting, and I call it a scoping meeting in the planning effort. And you present the hypothesis of what we're going to talk about today, including these options that you just talked about, and then you get feedback, and then based upon that feedback, you may change the hypothesis, you may not.
Thank you, Joel. And basically, you guys as a council have not made any decisions. We'll put that on the table at this moment in time, but you have been going in kind of a direction, and so if this changes our direction, I kind of want to get the focus on that, and I appreciate your comments. How you proceed forward is up to you guys, but I'm just kind of wanted to get a little clarity on position going forward. I had Indra and then Rob.
Yeah, I actually had a question way back when, and then a comment. So I just wondered on 13, but it seems to me part of our discussion, Stephanie, should also be on what happens if the entity we pick fails. And so we have this conglomerate of a site, now it's not managed. So I think we do need to talk about that piece as well, and what happens with that. And then I would just say, thank you, Joel. We've talked about a public forum and feedback from the public. I think that's critical. And so kind of where, to give you an idea, Clint, of where I'm at and the rest of the council, I would like staff to do a draft I would like to see a draft in place for further discussion. I think it's a viable option perhaps, with more meat to it maybe, and then, but definitely have a community forum before we decide anything, vote on anything for good. Thank you.
So I believe if we are to go through this presentation and give Stephanie already pronounced in the very beginning that she needs pretty specific directions on going forward before she can put together a draft of any sort. So we kind of need to go through that and get your guys' feedback on it. At this point, I was just trying to see if we have consensus on having further discussions with a grant program and starting those parameters. With that, Rob and then Indra. Victoria, sorry.
So, Clint, I'm glad you used the terms that Stephanie needs pretty specific direction to be able to move forward. I, as a counselor, also need pretty specific direction, and I've had none publicly from the public. And I don't know, are there any counselors who actually feel that the public has had, that the council has had enough input from the general public on size, scope, amount that the council should spend on this? To my knowledge, we've had no public input at a council-sanctioned meeting, so I have not gotten from the public specific direction. And to my knowledge, publicly, at a council-sanctioned event, none of the other councilors have either. So to me, that's still number one for me to get. And when we talk about different options, the different possibilities, the different parameters, there could be things that come out of a public forum that actually are new to me or new to the other counselors. So to move forward without me as a counselor getting specific direction is not something that I can do. Before today, I would say that even though their positions have been very malleable over the last few months, I've had some idea of where Victoria probably has been on this, and some idea of where maybe Indra has been on this. I have very little idea, but a small amount of where Seth and Joel and Rick could be on this. And I have had zero input from Eric or Kathleen that I can remember. So to me, that's also what the public needs to see and hear, is us counselors discuss it amongst ourselves so that, again, they know what specific direction we might be thinking of moving, which could alter how they feel, how the public feels about it. But so far, we just don't, to me, yes, there's been some private things at Calvary Church. There's been things said in executive session. There's been Vine Street proposals made in executive session. But in an open public forum, we have not gotten direction. And today, for the first time, I don't know, we've publicly, there's been a figure here that Victoria throws out, about 150 people. That's great, because that happens to be what the judge kind of defined as objectively reasonable. We've heard from, in the public at different presentations, 500 people. Well, what does the public think about that? Do they want to have an ongoing program that's going to essentially morph into that because it might be more successful in the long run if that could be afforded? Or do they want to limit it to 150 people? Most of the people I've spoken to, I know how they feel. But again, we haven't heard it at a public forum. I haven't gotten specific direction from the public, so I can't give specific direction to staff.
Aaron, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of public comment that council is ultimately going to want to have an input, and is important. If this was provided to you as an option to expedite the opportunity for a service provider to come in and the city partner with to help with regards to establishing some form of resting sites that would allow us to alleviate some of our unmanaged sites that we have and be in compliance with House Bill 3115. So the first question, like the mayor was asking of council, is we're currently right now on a path, not fully formally discussed at the council level, but have some general direction to where we're sort of going towards a provide real property to a single entity. So we've talked about this, and we've had these options up here that Stephanie put together for us. The recommendation that staff is providing is for council to consider a competitive grant program, because we believe that it would do a number of things that I think everyone here is talking about. We're all on the same page, and we think the competitive grant program would do so. If we developed a competitive grant program, it does provide for transparency and decision-making, opportunities for the public input, et cetera. And we could start with two things. One, if council agrees that, hey, let's try this route, this may be the route to go because of the options above and any other discussion, there's two ways we can go about doing this. Staff can look at what we have softly had defined for us, what's objectively reasonable through our court cases. We could implement those into what we believe would be a potential grant program, taking things like what Victoria talked about and suggestions to have in a grant program, and put those into a grant program for your consideration. Then we have something in place that we can also provide for the public. Hey, this is where we're going, this is what we're thinking about. Councilor Pell said 500, 150, whatever. We know 150 is what a local judge has deemed as objectively reasonable, so that would likely be what we would put in there. Now, at the time, if council's looking at the grant program and like, no, you know what, we want to have 500, great. If the public comes out and says, we want 500, great. Whatever council so desires. So we could put something together based on what we know today, which again is not firm and concrete on what's objectively reasonable, but we could put a package together for you, for your review, and then for public comment. Or we could also go through, and Stephanie has some great questions that we would be asking ourselves, but we can also ask you to get some additional input on what you would like to see forward. So if you don't want to go with competitive grant program, then some of those questions don't need to be answered today, or we wouldn't need to do that. And you can move forward with whatever kind of public outreach you so desire based on what other options you're trying to provide to establish some kind of partnership with a community member to help alleviate the situation that we have. Again, we believe that competitive grant program would be the way to do that, to provide the most transparency, the most public input, the opportunity for us to move forward in the most timely fashion to resolve the issues that we're trying to address.
Stephanie?
Just to add to that, one thing that I've found in developing programs, because this is not the first program I've developed, is it works better when you're trying to get feedback to actually have something in front of you. So if you want to get the public's feedback on what the city's looking at doing, we can do that. We can have, I'll move down to, we can go with that third option, direct staff to return for further discussion after a community forum, and do that with a draft. We can put something together based on a discussion today and then come back and fine tune it at that point after you've received it. It's a lot harder to develop something based on massive amounts of communication. If you have that starting point, people tend to restrict their comments and help focus things in a little bit better. So we're not saying we can't get that community feedback. It'll just end up with a little bit longer timeline, but it's still they're still reasonable, and we can come back with that draft for public discussion.
So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Aaron. I will reiterate, as a council body, you have not made a decision that is concrete in any matter in regards to this topic. It is your duty as a governing body to pick a direction and to come up with ideas to solve problems within your community. It is not necessarily the community's objective to come up with those ideas. You guys were elected as a governing body to solve problems. This is what we're trying to do, is solve a problem. This is just providing direction on a different path than you've looked at before. Again, this is a workshop. You are not making concrete decisions here. You are just directing staff to do stuff. So with that, I would, if there's any further discussion, do you guys want to proceed forward with maybe going in the direction of formulating a grant? We've got Indra, Seth, and Victoria. Oh, sorry, Victoria was up first, so Victoria, Indra, and Seth. That's why I write names down here.
Well, I think that earlier Joel mentioned that the competitive grant was the way to go. I agree that it is definitely the way to go, that it offers the most for the city. And we do have the first of those. We have a public meeting tonight that will provide feedback from the public. So there is one option that we already, I mean, it's tonight. So we are starting that process. I think that it's possible to do two things at the same time because of the nature of the problem is we want to probably address it, you know, as sooner rather than later. So I would be open. I would like to propose that we vote to go the competitive grant program route, understanding what Mayor said, that this isn't tying us. We're asking for staff to bring that back to us, and then I've also offered some parameters that I think really, based on a lot of things that we have heard from the public and from council too, they are here, and that will help to provide staff with some direction. So I would move to vote. Can
we get discussion first a little bit?
I thought we already had the discussion.
Well,
so,
I had a couple people behind you.
All right, no problem.
You are pushing in that direction, that's
Yes.
fine, but let's get some more discussion first. I had Indra, Seth, and then Kathleen raised her hand.
So I'm going to change my mind and think that we should not move forward until we do a public forum. It's my understanding that tonight's is educational on HB 3115, where the public is just submitting questions and we're giving information, which is valuable, but that it is not a feedback and engagement session with the public. I don't think it's right for us to decide now on where to go before we even have public input. And yes, we do make decisions, but we are elected by the people and should listen to them as well and not be set in our ways before we hear them and what they have to say. And then we make a decision on whether to go forth. I would also add that, and I've said this before, I would like to see data on what we have. And I hear people say, well, we know what we have out there, but how do we choose a successful program of size, scope, and whatever, unless we know exactly the problem we're dealing with? And I'm wondering why I can't get that information in a written form. So people are guessing how many are substance abuse, how many are disabled or seniors or families. But no one, the city can't provide that for me, a nonprofit can't provide that for me. I recommended months ago that we bring in an expert who can actually provide that data. I think that is critical before we can even move forward with a solution to this.
Thank you, Indra. Just to add to your questions there, UCAN has been tasked and is always tasked with doing a point-in-time count. I believe during our previous discussions in regards to this topic, they had not published that data yet. I believe that data is currently published on the point-in-time count. That is a state-mandated, state-defined count. And the second part of your question is I honestly don't know of a state in the United States that would go through and give you that statistical data, because specifically in Oregon, it's called anti-profiling. You can't ask those people those questions. You can't provide that status on how many people are in there mentally incapacitated versus drug addicted versus blah, blah, blah. That legally is not available to be asked. With that, Seth, and then Kathleen, Rick, and Joel. Seth.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm for the competitive grant program. I want to, I think moving forward with at least discussing some of the parameters today and then doing a community forum. I definitely want to do that before we make any final decisions. I know tonight's is on HB 3115, but I think that'll be a good lead-in and educational moment for the community. But I think getting a forum on the calendar as soon as we can, I mean, even June 2nd, I don't know, same time, maybe a different location, makes sense. I don't think a June 2nd date to have a vote on proposals is realistic in any sense. That's 2 weeks from now. But I do think we could have a forum, and I think having at least a framework makes sense going into the forum. It doesn't have to be complete, obviously. It can be left up for some interpretation. And yeah, hear what the community has to say.
Thanks, Seth. Kathleen, Rick, and then Joel.
Well, I think we have been talking about this topic for a while. I think we have heard a lot of public comment through emails and at city council meetings. I think this is evolving, and we have a new recommendation now. And this 6-point summary here looks like it could be part of a draft. And I think we're not done hearing from the public. We're still, hosting meetings and creating events for the public to speak. And I think we do know what the city needs. We want to get out of the homeless business. We want to make a room for the addressing the homeless problem with compassion, also with accountability. That's the whole purpose of bringing in a nonprofit. And I think if we tie all those things together, we are evolving in the right direction. I think there should be a cap on the amount of money that is considered. And let's see what else. Yeah, I think there should be deadlines so that this just doesn't go on and on and on. We're very hopeful that some of this is going to get us out from under the injunction, and then we can move forward in ways that we haven't been able to before. And yeah, I think we're heading in the right direction with this new suggestion.
Thanks, Kathleen. Rick, and then Joel.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the competitive grant program. I agree with many of the comments that Kathleen has stated, and also I think an important comment that Stephanie indicated, we need to focus, and I think by having a draft before us will allow us to focus, and that still allows us the opportunity to talk with the public and our constituents and make any modifications. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel, and then Victoria.
So of the two methods of either having a hypothesis or not having a hypothesis, they both get you in the same place. But it's procedure and it's not substance. And we can talk about those for a long time. I'm not sure it's worth our time to talk about the process as long as we have meaningful public input, either on the hypothesis or on open forum where it's not well-defined. And I'm sure different people would prefer different methods. If you're putting in for a scientific grant, you would have a hypothesis that you would test.
Thanks, Joel. Before we go any further with discussion, so currently we do have a motion on the dais in regards to going forward in the direction of a competitive grant program. There has been talk about getting feedback from the community in regards to parameters on that competitive grant forum, as well as Stephanie needs and staff needs some positive direction. So we do have a couple other people want to discuss, but I think in saying that, I would recommend maybe the next motion that comes up might amend it a little bit and add to it. But with that, I'll give it discussion back to Victoria and then Eric.
I just wanted to be clear that I said tonight was the beginning of the hearing from the public. I no way said that it was the end of the input from the public. And so I really just wanted to make sure that was clear. And I would... Oh, did we have more discussion?
Yeah,
there?
Eric.
Okay, then I'll wait.
And then Joel. No, Eric first.
I think the competitive grant program is the way to go. As far as public comment goes, I'm all for it. We need to do it. I think the people are pissed. They are done with these homeless camps. That being said, this is going to be, the competitive grant program seems to be the best way to do this. So I'm not saying that it can't evolve. I'm just saying we hear the public. I hear the public. The chief and his police department hears the public all the time. We've got people in the camps, or I'm sorry, in the parks. We're waiting for the injunction to be lifted. They are pissed. I'm pretty passionate about this. It's very upsetting. And I just want to say I hear everybody. I hear them. But seems to be us dithering here, kicking the can down the road is definitely not the way to go. So I definitely want public input, which we've been hearing. And we're making a decision here as far as the competitive grant program and all the other options we were presented here. That seems to be the best, quickest way forward. So that's what I'm for. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Joel, did you want to weigh in more? And
I just had two comments real quick. The storming part of this, Eric's right, everybody is pissed, including those that are living in these camps, because they would like a little, hopefully they're worthy of more dignity than what they're getting, and an opportunity if they choose to do that. And I know some of them do and some of them don't. So Eric's right. And as you come to a solution, that's what happens all the time. The other thing is, I would want to emphasize what the motion is not what we're deciding on. It's not going to go forward because what we're going to do is have a hypothesis, and this is a motion on the hypothesis of what we're thinking of at this point in time to get public feedback.
Thanks, Joel. Aaron, you want to weigh in?
So just listening to some of the council, it sounds like there's a majority moving towards the potential competitive grant program, and I've been listening to a number of your concerns also associated with this to maybe help move forward, because I know we've got a number of other issues also to address, but maybe entertaining a motion to provide direction for staff to move forward with a competitive grant program to be developed based on other feedback that you may provide in the questions, and then we'll develop the rest based on what we know to be objectively reasonable, we'll develop a framework. That framework would then be provided to you and provided to in a public forum. So we'll have a competitive grant public forum to get feedback on what the public thinks about what that looks like, and then bring it back to you for a business meeting where you can modify, adopt, or change based on your public input.
Thank you. I got Seth and Indra and then Rob. Oh, sorry, Rob first then.
So I think that's a good idea, Aaron. I just wanted to add that, Eric says the public is pissed. I want to also say that the public is extremely confused because of some of the things that council has done in the last few months. The public knows there's an undercurrent about a 7.8 acre Vine Street property. Calvary Church, they were still talking about, Stepping Stones was still talking about 500 people. The last thing we got from Stepping Stones was 250 to 300 people. Today, Victoria talks about 150 people. The public knows that all of these things have been going on behind the scenes or behind closed doors without any input. They're completely confused, and I still believe at least 80% of them don't even know the difference between a low barrier shelter and a no barrier shelter. So yes, they're pissed. They're also very confused and frustrated that council has not, in a public manner, officially listened to them.
I got Indra and then Seth.
I agree that people are very angry, but I disagree that everyone wants a grant program at all and a shelter, because you guys get the emails too, and I get a lot of people that want no sites, 0 sites, and they don't want to spend any money more on the homeless. And in this grant program, we are going to have to put millions of dollars out for a grant. So I think we need to really consider that. Aaron, I think what you suggested is fine. I think we draft or put together to present to the public is a great idea, and let them look at it all, provide feedback, and then, we are responsible ultimately for making that decision.
Thank you, Indra. Seth?
A couple things. I would have to agree with what Rob said. I think, one, people are pissed, obviously, but I spend a lot of time on social media and I read what people say, and a lot of the consensus is that nobody knows what's going on. So that's why I just think a public forum makes sense. Show up if you want to know what's going on and hear what we have to say. I don't know if I agree that people don't want any sites. I get it. I think in a perfect world, nobody does, but we live in the state of Oregon, so I don't know if that's realistic, and the consequences are going to be not great. And then I have a question for Aaron. If we do the forum, can we have a version of a draft of this, maybe sent to council with like a couple days time to provide written feedback, just so if there's any adjustments we'd like to see before a forum? I don't know.
Yeah, we could definitely do that, and I think that'd be a smart thing to do in case there's anything that's shouting out at you, whoa, wait a second, didn't think about that. So that would be what we do, based on further discussion today, if that's the direction you go. Stephen, you bring up any questions that we were talking about and make sure that there's anything we're not catching. We'll fill in the blanks. We'll provide you a draft, give you a quick turnaround time so we can get it out to the public and have that forum on that direction that council's considering.
Joel?
So is there any way, including with that hypothesis, definitions like what is a low barrier shelter and what definition of terms?
Okay, so some of that would be defined through the service providers and who would ultimately be responding. We're going to try to define what we need to be objectively reasonable when it comes to 3115. A number of those things are already defined in the state of Oregon. Some things haven't been defined. So we can't fully provide unless you want to provide what you think is objectively reasonable. I think it'd be better for us to go off of what we know works and is defensible throughout the state of Oregon, build that in as much as possible to our grant program, and see what we get for responses after we have the public feedback.
So if there is anything that is in the hypothesis that is deemed to be required because it's reasonable, just like any other investigation, we need to define those terms if we use it. Unless we want to make a conscious decision as to not use it for a valid reason, and that may well exist. But if there's some vocabulary there that we need to define that is part of the reasonableness so that we can communicate effectively and get that feedback, we need to include it.
Okay, so hopefully we're good with discussion at this moment in time. I don't see anybody raising hands. So yes, sir, Rob, go ahead.
And I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this because it is a legal issue that we heard in executive session from our attorney, or not Stephanie, but from Aaron Heisel. And it was a little bit confusing and disheartening at the time he gave us that information. And it's still a question. And I'm not sure what to do with that with regards to whether or not whatever proposal we might want to make would allow us to close the no barrier camps. And I think everybody heard that question that night. And we haven't heard any response that was in contrary to what we heard that night. So I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into any further detail. But what we heard that night wasn't very, it would indicate that this whole situation is more complicated, or could be, and maybe he's changed his mind since then, or maybe we're getting different legal advice. But you all know what I'm talking about. So I want to know, I guess, in this public session, what makes our city attorney think that having low barrier managed campsites will make it allowable for us to close the no barrier sites.
I think, as I said before, there's no guarantee you'll be able to. I think that this is the best option to close most, if not all. We may be able to get to all, but you won't have to have 4. You'll be able to significantly reduce, if not completely eliminate that. There's just no guidance from the courts yet on where the lines are drawn and what constitutes a barrier that's going to push you over the threshold. I think it's trial and error by all the different jurisdictions, so I'm not going to tell you we will be able to, but I think we can significantly reduce the population on city property.
And what do you base that statement on?
Because there's going to be a reasonable place for them to go. And that's been one of the big things with Grants Pass is there's no place else but city property for a homeless person to be.
Okay, and have you discussed that with our other attorney?
Yes.
Okay, so then he's changed his mind. Thank you.
He's been on the same page with that before, which is you may not be able to, and we're going to be held to a high standard, but if we can find a way, hopefully we can.
Kathleen?
I just wanted us to consider that there might already be a no barrier shelter already established in the community that could provide for that.
Was that a question? Okay. All right. Okay. So at this point, we have a semblance of a motion. Would you like to continue with that motion or amend it per our conversation? Victoria?
Well, I'd still like to motion to direct staff to create a competitive grant program. And I would like to submit, I'm not saying that this must be in it, but I would like to submit the 6 points that I went over earlier as some things that might go into that grant because I think they might be helpful. So with that, I motion again to direct staff to create a competitive grant program for the purpose of buying land or infrastructure for the purposes for a resting site that includes a managed resting site. So there's my motion.
Yeah, and I believe I'm assuming you would agree with some of the parameters that Aaron had laid out for, in regards to notification and how it's built and how it's brought back to us and then going through a public forum.
Absolutely, but it just needs to be done sooner rather than later.
So we have a motion on the table to proceed forward in a direction of establishing a competitive grant program with staff's input as well as your guys' input, with an avenue for community input before something is brought to a public meeting. Do we have a second? Second with Rick. Any further discussion? Indra?
So this motion is basically saying that council wants to move forward with the grant before we even have public input. Because this is not just a draft to present. Is this correct? This is my understanding that she just motioned to establish the grant.
No, that is not the intent of the motion. The intent is to give direction to staff to go, that the council is going to be exploring and educating themselves on this process. We haven't made a decision. There's no decision to go forward and establish a grant. So the word establish was used in the motion, but I believe it was intended to give staff direction in regards to some of the parameters that Aaron had laid out. So basically, we're just moving in a direction. That's the way I intend.
Can I guess I'm not clear on the difference between this establishing or moving forward versus a draft of the grant. Can you clarify that?
Sure. So we've got steps, a number of steps in process if this motion passes, and it's been clear today. If the motion passes, then we're going to be exploring the opportunity of the creation of a potential grant program to help bring in services that would eliminate and reduce heavily our need to have our own personal unmanaged campgrounds. There's going to be a process associated with that if council wants to consider it. The first thing is we need to provide you with a draft so you can consider that. That draft is going to be provided to you with a short turnaround time to where we're then going to present it to the public. Hey, here's something that we're considering. What are your thoughts? What do you think about the parameters? Do you have any additional comments and or suggestions? That will then be formulated. A report will be provided to council that will go to you to where you'll determine, okay, this looks like or this does not look like, or we want to modify this or we want to scrap it and something else new has come up. And you'll have an opportunity after that public forum and after any modification you want to do to potentially establish a grant program through a future business meeting.
Thank you for clarifying. That should be the motion, what you just said.
Joel? Go ahead, Joel.
Just a quick thing, and in any analysis, the no action alternative is always viable. So that is there, but you have to have a hypothesis, and then you use the no action to compare the effects against. And you say, okay, here's the effects of not taking action. Here's the effects of taking action. What do we want to do? So no action is always a viable option.
Seth?
Yeah, one quick question. So Aaron, we will be able to view a draft before the forum and provide feedback as council?
Yes.
Okay.
And the question is, though, there's two things about doing this. We had some, are you going to want to have a workshop to have a general discussion on the draft before it goes to a forum, and that would be fine? Or are you comfortable with me taking comments from council, trying to modify the draft based on your comments and provide it to council? I would want clarity on what way you would like to provide your feedback on the draft.
I mean, there's a council meeting, there's a workshop in 2 weeks. So I guess that's, and I guess it depends on when we want to do the forum. I don't know if we're looking out at dates or not yet.
Well, if you would like to have this as an item in 2 weeks, I'm seeing Stephanie's eyes, they went up and down with a head shake following. So we can have this on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. You can give feedback on the draft. And knowing that and thinking that any changes you may have could be modified within a small amount of time, we could have the forum, I would say probably a week after that. You would want to be able to provide information to the public on what it is that they're looking at. So I would not recommend having a forum the same week as your workshop. So they can have at least a week to digest what the proposal is that you're looking at. So maybe on the off Monday that you don't have a meeting, we actually have a meeting that Monday. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion to direct staff to go in the direction to put together a competitive grant draft in regards, bring it back in a workshop for further discussion and molding and changes, and shortly after that, within a week's time, go to a public forum for public input. Does that pretty much define it?
Yes, it does. It means that we'd be having the workshop on this agenda item on the 2nd, and we would be having a forum providing feedback on the 9th.
Rob?
So would the forum be in the evening or another workshop time?
Council could provide me direction on which way they see fit.
I would say evening.
Okay, so just to reiterate, directing staff to put together a draft of a competitive grant program to be presented in a workshop back to council for further deliberation and adjustments. Then after a week's time, announcing and putting it into a public forum to get public feedback. That's where we're at. And we have a second on that? I think we got from Rick. And I apologize if we've further defined your motion, but hopefully you're in agreement with that. Okay, thank you. With that, you want another comment, Joel?
I just had a short discussion. We need to make sure when we put that together that we know where we're at in the process. We're still not working at a motion for the final answer.
Oh, absolutely not.
And so what we put together as I keep calling it the hypothesis, it's exactly that.
Absolutely.
And so you don't want to get stuck with what the hypothesis is before you go to the public, because you got to be flexible and you got to listen and you got to think.
Absolutely. Okay. With that motion and second on the table, let's get a consensus here. Victoria?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Joel?
Yes.
Seth?
Yes.
Indra?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to look at you, Stephanie. Do you have direction? Would you like us to go through some of these parameters before we end this presentation?
I think as much as we can, that
Okay.
would be helpful. It will help provide the most detailed draft up front.
Okay, so we've gone through the options point, so the next would be
Define city needs.
define city needs. Can you reiterate that slide really quickly, and then we'll open it up for questions?
We're just trying to define what our end goal is, what is the need that we want a provider to give us options on how they might do that. So there's some potential ones on your screen, or we can come up with other ones as well.
Any questions or discussion? That would be Joel.
Yes.
All of the above?
Yes.
Okay, any
Their
further
evaluation
discussion or
criteria.
questions in regards to defining the needs? Rob?
Most of what I hear from, certainly from the, we'll say, conservatives in Grants Pass, the number one need is to do whatever the minimum is to be able to close our no barrier sites. There's a lot of other talk out there as to all kinds of follow-up and making, multi-year impacts in people's lives and so forth. But I think that the number one need that I hear people say, especially conservatives, is that they want to do whatever would be looked at favorably by the court to allow us to close our no barrier camps.
So that would be option one, the first bullet point.
So I would take that definition as that, and I'm not trying to speak for you guys, but to direct staff to implement the city's needs solely and aligned with HB 3115 and the current lawsuit. Any further discussion or questions in regards to that definition?
No, I think that, Mayor, I think that gives us direction. You're basically saying try to define the needs based on what we know is objectively reasonable based on our experience and experience of other cities within the state of Oregon.
Any further discussion on that? Okay. You have direction on that. Next is housing, a strategic plan, housing and homelessness outcome to results initiatives.
I think that already was covered by the needs. That was a secondary slide.
Okay, what's the next one you want to get direction on that?
Eligibility, who can apply, and are we going to require or encourage partnerships?
Joel?
Yes.
Okay, so the definition of putting this in a competitive grant program opens it up to an RFP process, and that would make it more competitive across the board.
Right.
Okay.
Who should we allow to apply for that?
Kathleen?
That if the nonprofit has to have a managed campsite. And then I just had a question about this, encourage with points available for demonstrating partnership. What does the points mean?
And that goes to one of the questions on what is a successful applicant and what do they need to demonstrate is how much weight do you give to the various components? So if we want partnerships to be a higher point value in the deciding factor as opposed to a lower one. So you can either require it or you can say we strongly encourage it and we're going to give you a little boost the more partnerships you have.
So it adds more definition to the criteria that you guys would use as a council to determine that applicant. Does that make sense what I said?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion in regards to eligibility? Rob?
So I'm not sure if I understand the last thing that we just discussed. So should partnerships, collaboration be required, or would they get, more benefit? To me, if you had an ongoing nonprofit with a track history of actually doing this before, successful track history of doing it before, to me, I wouldn't care at all if they had any partnerships with anyone else, if they successfully have pulled this off somewhere else on this scale or larger. So, I guess if we're going to have any kind of point system, it needs to include specific track history of doing this exact thing should outweigh, 7 different small nonprofits that have never done it before, and just because they're collaborating, that they would potentially get as many points for someone who's been successful but larger but doesn't really need that much help. So I'm not sure how that figures into how we want to write that up.
We could definitely have in part of the grant criteria, reviewing, a track history or what experience and provide points for those that have a proven track record of providing these services.
Rick?
I believe one of the important parts of including the opportunity for partnership is because there can be different degrees of partnerships. But one thing for a nonprofit, it may be important that the city has issued a letter of endorsement of the proposal so that they can go for grants. So I do believe partnerships is an important element. Thank you.
So I take that as not a requirement, but a ranking criteria?
Okay, and
as
also
well as experience?
And include the history of success as well.
Correct. Anything else in regards to eligibility, Andrea?
I guess this is where it would go, but I would think we would want to weigh the financial success of the entity that applies, like what kind of funds do they have already to operate on an ongoing basis, supposing they don't get all the grants that they are applying for. So do they have the financial stability to be able to, we can help them start, but to maintain this program?
Yep, and that was already one of the questions on the list under the award considerations, is to make sure that they are, or was it a different one? It's in here, they would have to demonstrate sources of funding and continuing operations would be my recommendation.
Okay, any other comments or questions in regards to eligibility? Okay, going on.
All right, the next one is allowed or unallowed uses. Do we want to limit what those uses can be for, or keep it fairly broad and just have a few exclusions? What are your options on that?
Joel.
As a hypothesis, I put forth the funding can be used for a real property purchase, lease, other purchases, construction, renovation. Cannot be used for provision of services or operations.
Victoria?
I'm assuming that would include infrastructure. Is that just another word for that? Thank you.
Yeah, Councilor King really pulled those two out. One's basically capital, one's operations. So would the grant be for capital and operations, or either or one of the two? And right now he's recommending it just be for capital expenses.
Rob?
I completely agree with that. I think it's a hard line in the sand that we need. Otherwise, I think that operational expenses are going to be a never-ending hemorrhaging of city finances. I think we need that hard line, I believe. I agree with Joel.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions or comments in regards to allocate or allowed and unallowed uses? Nope. Okay, back to you, Stephanie.
The next section is on award considerations and how do we want to, I guess this one I probably need to read the questions. Should it be available as an advance or a reimbursement? A one-time payment, periodic or milestone-based? A cap on the award to a single applicant? Should we require any match? And what kind of timelines should we be looking at for an applicant to be able to receive those funds? Because they may get the grant up front and it take 4 to 6 months for a building to get completed. So how do we want to handle that?
Joel.
So how have we handled past grants, like for drug treatment?
Well, for one, it's sort of tough. I was thinking maybe it could be that a council member would say only in reimbursement, and I think there could be some variation to that. Say, for instance, if we were going to do a grant and they were purchasing property, they may not have the upfront dollars, but what we would do is we would provide the dollars in escrow once we have all of the things and everything signed, and that wouldn't close out until such time. So there could be a nuance there. But you asked about just grants in what category?
Oh, the grants we had for treatment of the addicted, when we had that $1 million grant and then it bought property with it. How did we handle that?
Oh, on track, it was basically with sort of what I mentioned. They had they had the ability to. Well, they were actually not purchasing property though. Did they purchase the property?
Let me jump in.
Yeah.
So with the on-track property, that was on a reimbursement basis. We do have a few. Excuse me. We do have a few variations out there with grants with the Mid-Rogue Foundation that are actually. We are working with the organization to help kind of not front load the money, but ensure that they're not burdened with a reimbursement basis, but they have to provide a lot more documentation, quotes and things up front that show the validity of us giving them the money up front.
The other thing I'm thinking, so my answer is yes, similar procedure to what we did on track. The other thing is if there's a piece of property that they get, like Mint got, so that it was less than the appraised value or didn't take up the whole grant, that some provision in there so that the rest of the grant can be used to further the goals of the city. And it would probably be with that, give a performance incentive to the successful bidder, so that they don't pay $2 million for a $500,000 piece of property.
Yeah, there'd be provisions for that in there. There'd also be provisions that we would have to where if you provided the property, the dollars for a piece of property, we would want to have some assurances that the public dollars are being utilized appropriately. We'd probably have some minimum performance standards that would be put in there. And one would be, for instance, that the property, if that service is stopped within that property within the first 10 years, it reverts back to the city. Or that maybe we put some kind of deed on the property that it must be used for low-income housing or something. There's some things like that to make sure that if something happens, the public's dollar would be handled appropriately.
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion, comments, or questions in regards to the word considerations? Rob?
Very briefly, yeah, I mean, Stephanie's probably looked at it already. If not, I know Aaron has, but we've done we did 2 grants like this written up already. The one with All Care had a lot of those contingencies already built in. You've probably seen it. It's not like we have to reinvent the wheel here. It's all pretty much been done before.
We would use that as a starting point and see if we needed to make any modifications depending on what council wants to do.
So yeah, it sounds like that staff will be using the Mint grant as well as the All Care grant as templates or starting points. Any further discussion or questions in regards to award considerations? Okay.
Any thoughts on a cap or a match requirement?
Kathleen?
I just would prefer that it would be a one-time payment and there would be a cap on a single applicant.
And I know cap amount and such is a lot to ask of you for today, but my thought would be potentially that we leave that open. And if you move forward with this, and at the next workshop when you're reviewing this, maybe we have a discussion where JC can also talk about the financial opportunities. Then at that point, you can give us some general direction, and we're still going to the public before you make a decision.
Yep. Okay.
So does that seem amicable with council that we get more information in regards to cap and amount? Okay.
Okay. Next one is, what should a successful applicant be able to demonstrate? This is what basically their narrative and their proposal. What are they going to have to prove to the city in order to be able to receive award funds?
Joel?
How their actions, proposed actions relate to the city's objectives.
Any other discussion? Questions? Victoria?
I would say collaborations and partnerships are important here, as people mentioned before.
Do you have any other questions in regards to that for council?
I think my question would be, is there anything on this list that you don't think should be there at this point? I've heard some other good questions that we would probably add to the list, but is there anything on there you don't want?
So the question back to council is there any of these items that have been presented that you do not want to be built into this draft? Indra?
Nothing I don't want, but I'm sorry, I'm a little slow. Maybe this goes back to define city needs, but I would want to see a plan for a robust treatment program that whatever entity has, that they have that in place. I don't really care about the other services, but I think since that's a major issue, we would want to know how they're going to treat addiction.
Just 1 second, Eric. Would this be the portion where you would be requiring like an operational manual or something like that?
Probably not a full manual, but at least an explanation of how the program would run, all the behind the scenes types of things. We'd want a full explanation of what it would look like and how it would operate.
Okay, perfect. That answers my question. Eric?
Yeah, definitely a treatment program of some kind, but that's pointed out, I believe, on number 3 here on this RFP paperwork. That's all.
Think any further discussion or questions in regards to directions needed for a successful applicant? Joel?
So again, I just say yes to all those.
Okay. Indra?
And then I think you have this in here, but just want to make sure that, because people are concerned about, once we start something, it grows, so that there are, we see outcomes of the program, that what is their success rate? Are they actually transitioning people successfully?
So I had a question. It kind of goes in general to a grant, and I'm hearkening back to the document that was put forth for the Mint grant. It was written in there, I believe, that if you didn't meet the parameters or the metrics of success, then that basically grant turned into a loan and that had to be paid back. Is that something that might be worked into this as well?
It's something we'll look into.
Okay. Any further discussion on this topic? Okay, back to you, Stephanie.
All right, the next one is application timeline. Do we have just a single deadline? Do we have a rolling deadline or the combination?
Joel?
I would say single deadline, and then if we don't get enough applicants, then we move forward with either a rolling application or some other method, but we need to have a single deadline to start with.
Okay. And we're not defining that deadline until we get to a decision-making point.
Correct.
But that basically narrows it down to just one decision, and then the council has the ability to re-up that or change that if the applicants don't come in.
Right.
Okay. We have clarity on that. Next, back to you, Stephanie.
And then the last one, and I don't know if this is a decision you want to make today, it's maybe one we can move to that next workshop, is how much money do you want to make available for the grant?
Joel?
So we need to look at what we're spending now on a yearly basis and take 2 or 3 years of that and put it into the grant, and then I would anticipate that money would go away.
Perfect, and I kind of take that as the synopsis you said earlier, as having JC run the numbers and present some stuff back to us to make that decision at a later date.
Yeah, I'm available to talk about it today if that's what's needed, but and just for other clarifying information, I think Stephanie touched on the fiscal year 26 recommended budget has $371,000 proposed for current resting sites.
Seth?
Yeah, JC, is there a way to get like a memo or something maybe by like the end of the week with just a breakdown? I don't want to make you do it today.
Yes, I just want to give the caveat or clarification that any one of these choices has repercussions either on a program or the position of the general fund.
Okay. I don't know, it'd be nice to see some numbers just to start thinking.
So JC, do you have clarification on that? He's requesting a memo sooner than later in regards to that. I think it's kind of a little premature for us to go into that conversation right now, but sorry, I think it was Joel and then Indra, it looks like.
Well, I was just doing a brain dump, and so $300,000 per % of the general fund, right? And so in rough terms, 1 year's operating expenses for what we got today is 1% of carryover. And if you do 1 to 2% of that, or even 3%, and it's done, then you actually increase the carryover in years to come. That's the basis of the discussion in my brain.
Okay, any further, oh, sorry, Indra, you were up, sorry, go ahead.
So I have no idea how much the cap would be, how much different entities would want. So what I'm wondering is, if we give a cap or don't, I mean, can the entities, kind of like people do bids, can the entities look at what we want and say, we can do this for so much money or this, and that's part of our weighing of the choosing?
There's two ways you can go about this. That's one of them. You can say, we want something that does X, Y, and Z, and it's a much longer and more detailed process and figuring out, so that you're comparing apples to apples. What this is opening up and what we've been talking about is more of a potentially comparing apples to oranges. So we have these problems, you tell us how you can meet those, and they may not be the same mechanism for doing that. What this would allow for is money that we could allocate to those projects, as opposed to saying, we just want to find the lowest bidder to give us these services.
Well, I'm not even saying that we want the lowest bidder, because we might pick a middle or a high bidder if we thought they were the best entity to do it. But just, I would hate to see someone not apply because they're $50,000 over the cap that we chose, right? When they might be the best long-term solution, because I think that's what we're looking for here is, and why we're taking our time. What is the best long-term solution for our city?
Joel?
And it wouldn't bother me at all to defer this decision till we have a meeting on the plan itself. Unless there's an urgent need to define it today.
Okay, so I guess need council sentiment on addressing the funding needs at a later date when you have more information specifically from JC and more feedback from staff. Is that a good sentiment? And the public, sure. Okay, do you have direction on that?
I do.
Okay.
What we'll do, though, based on that, Mayor, if that's all right, is when we schedule this for the June 2nd workshop, we will have a financial component where JC will discuss with you as a follow-up to the memo what your financial options are.
Looks like they're... All right. So I think we've gone through most of your questions. Do you have at least unmuddied water clarification?
I have enough to put together a draft.
Excellent. Any further discussion or questions before we end this topic? Seeing none, thank you very much, Stephanie. Okay, next on the agenda is agenda review. I'll bring it back to council. Is there any questions or comments in regards to the agenda? And you have a form. Landscape-wise, Rick, and then Indra.
So Wednesday night, we have on there to review salary schedules, and I've been, one of my hesitations I stated in a previous public session was I didn't have enough information to really make a appropriate decision. And one of the standards we have as a city council when we make a decision to feel we have adequate documentation, evidence for that decision so it's defendable. And at this time, I'm still lacking information, and I guess staff is still working on that, and I didn't know when we could expect that.
Mandy's here to maybe answer that. With my last discussion I had with her, we will be able to get you the raw data with regards to comparators, which is what you were asking for, I think tomorrow.
Will that listing, when it does the comparators, I realize the consultant went through an evaluation of those positions, and it may or may not include longevity, the assignment that individual has and so forth for the projected position on the, and I didn't know if that would also be available.
I guess I need further clarification on what you're talking about.
Well, for
longevity.
instance, like Jason actually has 3 jobs.
Yeah.
But that's not on the not on the step sheet indicating that.
You're talking about responsibilities based versus the job title?
Correct.
Yeah, that's all been put into place with the consultant. The consultant is also going to be providing a presentation and be able to ask questions of that night also. But if you have specific questions, please make sure to let me know, and I can get them to the consultant so that she could be prepared to answer those.
Appreciate it. Will do. Okay.
And Indra up next.
So I don't know how long next meeting, the meeting is, but we talked about the resolution with the comment cards and the semi-monthly meetings for agenda setting going to monthly. I don't see that anywhere on here, and it was my understanding we were going to move it to have a discussion to vote on that resolution. And in the meantime, I don't know, I just expected that we would be following the current resolution that is in place, but on the June calendar, I only see one mayor council agenda setting meeting. So I just would like some clarification on where that is and what we're doing there.
So I can tell you on the back of the calendar, it's to be scheduled to have that workshop discussion. As you may appreciate, yourself and staff have been extremely busy these past 3 weeks. And we have looking for a great opportunity to have that discussion, but don't have something prepared at the moment. Likely after the budget season's over and these community forums and things are taken care of, we'll be able to do that. But once we have that scheduled, we'll have that discussion. It is on the back to be scheduled.
Okay, thank you. I see that. In the meantime, should not the current resolution be followed?
I suppose that's ultimately up to council to determine. We have some practices that we're following, and do they follow directly the resolution that was adopted by council? I'd say no. There's some minor modifications to those, and we can continue down that road. Or if council wants to defer back to the way it is currently written, we could do that too. It's mainly direction from council and the mayor on the topics that you're discussing, because it truly is the council protocols and the mayor protocols that we're talking about.
I guess I would just suggest to council that whichever way it goes is fine, but I think I'm looking forward to having that discussion so that council's all in agreement. And I think it would set a bad precedent to just change resolutions without councils fully agreeing to it. And that's all I'm suggesting.
Thank you, Idra. Anybody else for agenda? Seeing none, we have a Public Safety Advisory Committee motion.
I'm sorry, can we have an agreement on that, or like, yes, we're going to follow the current resolution, or no, we're not?
I'm going to say no, because at this moment in time, the way I interpret the charter, it is my discretion on agenda setting meetings, and I've set that. And if the resolution has to change, we can bring it up in council in a workshop and change it. Indra, you want to add in more?
So respectfully, any resolutions we pass, then you could just change? I'm asking.
No, the charter specifically says in regards to the mayor's responsibilities and power is for the agenda setting meetings. That's the only thing I've changed. Has nothing to do with any other resolution. I was actually unaware that the resolution was in place when I made that decision out of time's sake and the fact that I didn't believe that having an agenda setting meeting every other week was advantageous to anybody, because it was just kind of a waste of time, because we set the agenda at a month's period each time. So if the council wants to bring that up, and they are going to be bringing that up in a upcoming workshop to discuss that further, that's fine. Rick?
So initially, the agenda settings used to be the city manager, the mayor, and the council president. Rob Pell recommended that we had the opportunity for a city councilor to attend, just to have the experience and so forth, and that was done, and it's worked out quite well. I've made the comment, and I guess I'm looking for confirmation, if a second city councilor wanted to attend that meeting, I don't think that would be a problem, would it?
I didn't think there was ever a problem with that, and I thought it was open to any counselor that wanted to attend.
So I think with that knowledge out there, if a city councilor wants to attend that meeting, you have that option. Thank you.
Yeah, and my decision to change the frequency of the agenda setting meeting is to work better with schedules, as well as it seemed like it was too much time to set, I mean, I just didn't, I thought it would be more confrontational with the council as well as the public if we constantly change the agenda every week. So to set an agenda with a month's time period, I think that's a very efficient way to do it. That's where my reasoning came from.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that, and perhaps everyone agrees, but to me, it's the time. So I've not even been to one, and I realize I can go, but now you're down to one a month to go to. And to me, it's a time to have connection with the leaders, the mayor, the president, the council president, and the city manager, and feel like you're a part of that. And so that's all. It feels a little alienating to me, and maybe I'm the only one to feel like you don't and I get that it's set, and I mean, it could be a very quick meeting and you just agree on what's on there because everything's good, but it's also a time to maybe propose something you want on there that has never gotten on there for months.
And part of our procedure, just so you know, is that the council president does usually reach out to everybody on the council, and she brings a lot of information to those agenda setting meetings from her correspondence with each council member. So there is a lot of input from council members that don't have the ability to attend.
Well, that has not been done.
Can I also mention, Mayor, I appreciate the conversation that's happening here, and I look forward to having that discussion so we get clarity on what our council norms are. But just as a reminder also, because I know there's a number of new council members on the dais, you do have the opportunity at every workshop under agenda review to try to champion a topic. You could pull it from the back and you can say, hey, I'd like to have this on the agenda. Or I'd like to have this in June or July, or here's a new idea. Do I have 3 council members that support me? And you can also do that under matters for mayor, council, and staff Wednesday nights, asking for the same thing. So those are just 2 other opportunities besides actually going to this agenda setting meeting. You can come to these meetings during agenda review, which we're discussing right now, and say, hey, I had a conversation with a number of community members. They think this is a really hot topic. Do I have consensus on council that we talk about this? And let's move it to a workshop, or let's move it to the back of the calendar. And this is a great opportunity for that also.
Any further discussion in regards to agenda? All right. Public Safety Advisory Committee motion. I'm not understanding what we're doing here.
So, Mayor, when advisory committees make motions, they are brought in front of council just so you can review those motions. And so there is a motion in front of you. The motion is on the dais. I can just I'll just read the motion if you'd like. The City Public Safety Advisory Committee recommends to both City Council and Budget Committee to add 8 public safety staffing positions, full-time employees to the police, fire, rescue, and public safety support services in the 26 budget. The specific staffing positions added are to be decided by the city manager, chiefs, and would need to be approved by the city council. So that was the motion from the advisory committee. I have had a conversation with some of the advisory committee members, and JC and I are scheduled to be at their meeting on Tuesday, I think. Or is it Tuesday? Yes, tomorrow. Busy. And we're going to discuss with them the motion, and from a standpoint of the motion, comparing the motion to the purpose of the committee, there does not seem to be full alignment. So we were going to talk to them about that also, if council, unless I hear anything different from council. Really, the purpose of the committee, and I'm going to read the committee, I think it's important. The committee advises the city council on matters related to community engagement, research and analysis, community facilitation, resource identification. Its role is to help facilitate communication between the public and the city regarding public safety planning. So their goal when we first created this group was to be an advocate for wherever council thinks council should go. In this situation, they've made a policy recommendation that deals with budget and FTE. It specifically states in their purpose that it is not intended to act as an oversight group or become involved in daily operations, staffing decisions, or departmental management. So JC and I, unless there's objections from council, we're just going to go and have a discussion with that group to reinforce the original spirit and purpose of the group and what the city council implemented the group for. So if there's no objections, I'll continue to do that with JC tomorrow.
Discussion on that, Joel?
So this discussion has been festering for, probably 2 to 3 years. And there's the former JC's position, Jay, and then it's also, it's not only festered in terms of staffing, it's festered in terms of funding and a disagreement on funding. And there's a part of truth in what Aaron said. There's also a part of truth in where council should go in policy and increasing public safety. And then there's the fee that we put on the water bill that was strictly aligned for public safety. And at that point in time, we decided not to add new positions. It was to handle the budget. But I would like to put this, I would not like this to fester anymore. I would like to solve it. And the way I'd like to solve it is, if it was just me personally and I was CEO of the city, I would have JC and Jay sit down and give to me what their options are, and then have them give feedback to each other as to what is the truth. Otherwise, this is just going to keep festering, and it takes up a lot of energy and doesn't build trust. And so rather than, this isn't the right word, but hide behind it's not policy, I would, and that's not the intent of the city manager. I would rather face it directly and say, what is the truth here and what are we looking at? Because it has festered now for 2 or 3 years, and we need to resolve it in a way that's healthy for our future.
I think JC wants to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I appreciate the councilor's comments, and I appreciate anybody in the community, their passion for the way their city operates and the way they run. I believe last Tuesday in the budget committee meeting, I brought forward data and visuals as to explaining where we sit as far as not necessarily my viewpoint or conservative nature as far as policy, but actually what the numbers say. If you'd like for me to run through those again, I'd be more than happy to do that.
I would like you to do that in the presence of Jay and perhaps a couple other citizens, because they disagree with you.
So I think at this point, you are correct. We do need to tackle this. We've been needing to tackle this for years, and we have been trying. This is truly a council challenge, community challenge, and we have this as a topic of priority discussion on June 30th, which would be an okay place for you to reconsider, to also consider this motion. But we have a discussion on public safety and public safety funding and service levels on the 30th of June.
I don't think we can push it aside. I think we need to consider it, and it's a yes or a no or a partial. I don't think we can push it aside and not have a decision on it, because it's been festering for a long time.
Well, Councilor, as you know, it's been festering for a long time because there hasn't been an easy solution to the challenges that we're facing. We now have a relatively fresh council, a new mayor, and I think we need to start with some of the basics, sort of like we're doing with the forum today with 3115, and we need to create a good foundation of knowledge, and that's going to start with that June 30th workshop, unless you'd like to move it sooner. Staff could get it to you sooner.
No, that would be fine. And again, it's very similar to the unsheltered thing, where you have storming that occurs before the forming and the norming. And if we don't face it, it just continues to storm. And that takes too much energy, and the community deserves better than that. So we need to solve it.
Okay, so at this point in the agenda, we're supposed to be reviewing this Public Safety Advisory Committee's motion. It has been advised by staff that we further the conversation with the committee. So I'm looking for feedback from the council if you want to direct staff to get further correspondence with the advisory committee, or if you want to put a motion on the table to accept this motion. It's back up to you guys. You have advice from staff that we should, that they can further the conversation because it doesn't look like it's within the spirit of the actual committee.
Yeah, a potential recommendations, and we talked with the advisory committee based on what I talked about, and that this is maybe more timely, just as a general discussion, also to think about when you have your discussion on June 30th when it comes to public safety.
So council's consensus, if you want staff to further a conversation with the committee, and looking forward to the more robust conversation on June 30th. Thumbs up if you want to go that direction. Looks like we got consensus from the council. You have direction, Aaron?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our agenda for this workshop. And can I get a motion to adjourn?
Executive session.
And we do have an executive session scheduled up, so I would look for a motion to adjourn the workshop and proceed into executive session.
I motion to adjourn the workshop.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to adjourn and go into executive session. We have a second. Roll call, Victoria?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
Yes.
Joel? Seth?
Yes.
Indra?
Yes.
Okay. The council will now meet in executive session.